motions agreed to. The clerk will report the nomination.
Nomination, Department of Justice, Harmeet Dillon of California to be an Assistant Attorney General.
Mr. President, I send a cloture motion to the desk.
The clerk will report the motion to invoke cloture.
Cloture motion, we, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a close debate on the nomination of Harmeet Dillon of California to be an Assistant Attorney General, signed by 17 senators as follows.
Mr. President, I ask consent to reading the names be waived.
With that objection.
Mr. President, I yield the floor.
The senator from New Jersey.
I am really grateful, Mr. President. I'm grateful you're in the chair, and I'm grateful to be able to rise right now and speak. I want to say at the top that I have a tremendous love for this institution, and a lot of that's born from the people that are here, from the pages I get to know in every class to the folks that work the doors, the clerks, the parliamentarians. This is a special place, and a lot of the people who are known here are not the ones that really keep this place functioning. A lot of that's born from the people that are here, from the pages I get to know in every class to the folks that work the doors, the clerks, the parliamentarians. This is a special place, and a lot of the people who are known here are not the ones that really keep this place functioning. I come in here days and I have good moods or bad moods, but always find myself lifted when I walk onto this floor. It's a sacred civic space. It is extraordinary, and I'm always aware of the weight of history when I walk in here, no matter good day, bad day, whether I'm in a rush or not. When I touch the Senate floor, I feel something really magnificent. I don't think that our founders would have ever imagined a body like this, with black people on both sides of the aisle, with women serving here, with folks from many different backgrounds. We are, in many ways, doing what this Senate, what the founders had envisioned, which was this idea of every generation making this a more perfect union. But there have been times in this journey where our union was in crisis and was in peril. There have been times in this great American journey over our 250 years where so many heroes had to emerge, people that I've come to revere, like Joshua Chamberlain from Maine, who played such a pivotal role in the Battle of Gettysburg. What a noble soul he was. He would later go on to be the governor of his state and go on to great things, but his heroism lay that in a time of crisis, he stood up. I know there are veterans in this body, and I admire them so much, who have answered that call to serve our country and put their lives at sacrifice. There are people that I admire that are heroes of mine that were suffragists who were people who fought as abolitionists. There are people more recently that I've come to lionize and admire because they did so much for this country, not with titles, not with high rank or positions, but folks who, when this country was facing crossroads, was facing crises, they stood up, they spoke up. One of my greatest heroes of life was a man I got to serve with named John Lewis. And I served with him in this body, and every top opportunity I had, I would ask him about the times when he was just a 20-something. He was the youngest person who was a featured speaker on the March on Washington. He was called the bravest man in the civil rights movement because he kept putting himself in harm's way to dramatize, to let folks know, to bring attention to the injustices in this world, and to say very strongly that this, what is going on in our country, is not normal, that this going on in our country is wrong. I stand on this floor as a United States Senator, but I revere people who never stood on this floor, people who, before they even got to their 30s and 40s and 50s in life, were out there as great patriots fighting for this nation. I rise today in an unusual manner, and I want to be clear and explain that, but I just want to tell you what John Lewis said. It's a quote so many people know. And he really spoke not to members of the Senate or the Congress. He was really speaking to Americans. He said, "Get in good trouble, necessary trouble. Help redeem the soul of America." John Lewis died in 2020, in July, at a time that it was Donald Trump's first term in office. And he did what Congress people did, but he also did some really extraordinary things to fight for health care. My friend Chris Murphy knows about that. He was there when John Lewis did a open Facebook chats, not in this chamber or in the House chamber. He sat on the steps and people were there. I remember when he did a sit-in. They had to shut the cameras off on him. He got in good trouble on the House side, too. And so I start tonight thinking about him. I've been thinking about him a lot during these last 71 days. Get in good trouble, necessary trouble, help redeem the soul of America, and had to ask myself, if he's my hero, how am I living up to his words? I think Democrats and Republicans have made a lot of mistakes. No side has a monopoly on the truth. No side has been perfect servants of this country. But what's happened in the last 71 days is a patent demonstration of a time where John Lewis's call to everyone has, I think, become more urgent and more pressing. And if I think it's a call for our country, I have to ask myself how I'm living these words. So tonight, I rise with the intention of getting in some good trouble. I rise with the intention of disrupting the normal business of the United States Senate for as long as I am physically able. I rise tonight because I believe sincerely that our country is in crisis. And I believe that not in a partisan sense, because so many of the people that have been reaching out to my office in pain, in fear, having their lives upended, so many of them identify themselves as Republicans. Indeed, conversations from in this body to in this building to across my state and recently in a travel across the country, Republicans as well as Democrats are talking to me about what they feel is a sense of dread about a growing crisis, or what they point to about what is going wrong, that bedrock commitments in our country that both sides rely on, that people from all backgrounds rely on, those bedrock commitments are being broken. Unnecessary hardships are being borne by Americans of all backgrounds. And institutions which are special in America, which are precious, which are unique in our country, are being recklessly, and I would say even unconstitutionally affected, attacked, and even shattered. In just 71 days, the President of the United States has inflicted so much harm on Americans' safety, financial stability, the core foundations of our democracy, and even our aspirations as a people for, from our highest offices, a sense of common decency. These are not normal times in America. And they should not be treated as such. John Lewis, so many heroes before us would say that this is the time to stand up, to speak up. This is the time to get in some good trouble, to get into necessary trouble. I can't allow this body to continue without doing something different, speaking out. The threats to American people and American democracy are grave and urgent, and we all must do more. We all must do more against them. But those 10 words, if it is to be, it is up to me. All of us have to think of those 10 words, 10 two-letter words. If it is to be, if it is up to me, because I believe generations from now will look back at this moment and have a single question. Where were you? Where were you when our country was in crisis and when American people were asking for help? Help me. Help me. Did we speak up? When 73 million American seniors who rely on Social Security were to have that promise mocked, attacked, and then to have the services undermined, to be told that there will be no one there to answer if you call for help. When our seniors became afraid and worried and panicked because of the menacing words of their president, of the most wealthy person in the world, of cabinet secretaries, did we speak up? When the American economy in 71 days, has been upended, when prices at the grocery store were skyrocketing and the stock market was plunging, when pension funds, 401ks were going down, when Americans were hurting and looking up, where the resounding answer to this question was no. Are you better off economically than you were 71 days ago? Where were you? Did you speak up? At a time when the President of the United States was launching trade wars against our most close allies, when he was firing regulators who investigate America's biggest banks and biggest corporations and stop them from taking advantage of the little guy or the little gal or my grandmother or your grandfather, dismantling the agency that protects consumers from fraud, that the only one whose sole purpose is to look out for them. Did you speak up when the President of the United States, in a way that is so crass and craven, peddled his own meme coin and made millions upon millions upon millions of dollars for his own bank account at a time so many are struggling economically? Did you speak up when the President of the United States did what amounts to a car commercial for the richest man in the world right in front of America's house, the White House, when the President tried to take health care away? Where were you? Did you speak up? Threatening a program called Medicaid helps people with disabilities, helps expectant mothers, helps millions upon millions of Americans. And why? Why? As part of a larger plan to pay for tax cuts for the wealthiest amongst us, who've done the best over the last 20 years, for billionaires. It seemed so close to the president that they sat right on the dais at his inauguration and sit in his cabinet meetings at the White House. Did you speak up when he gutted public education, slashed funds for pediatric cancer research, fired thousands of veterans who risked their lives for their country, when he abandoned our allies and our international commitments at a time when floods, fires, and hurricanes and droughts are devastating communities across this country, when countries all around the world are banding together to do something, and he turned his back? Did you speak up when outbreaks of dangerous infectious diseases are still a global threat, but yet we have stopped engaging in the efforts necessary to meet those threats? Where were you when the American press was being censored, when international students were being disappeared from American streets without due process, when American universities were being intimidated into silence, challenging that fundamental idea of freedom of thought, freedom of expression, when the law firms that represent clients that may not be favored were attacked and attacked and attacked, where were you? Did you speak up when they came for those firms? Or what about when the people who attacked the police officers, who defended this building and American democracy on January 6th, who just outside those doors put their lives on the line for us, and many of them would later die? Where were you when the president pardoned them, celebrated them, and even talked of giving them money, the people who savagely beat American police officers? Did you speak up when Americans from across the country were all speaking up? More and more voices in this country speaking up, saying this is not right, this is un-American, this is not who we are, this is not America. Did you speak up? And so I rise tonight because I believe to be about what is normal right now, when so much abnormal is happening, is unacceptable. I rise tonight because silence at this moment of national crisis would be a betrayal of some of the greatest heroes of our nation, because at stake in this moment is nothing less than everything that we brag about, that we talk about, that makes us special. At stake right now are some of our most basic American principles that so many Americans understand are worth fighting for, worth standing for, worth speaking up for. Like if you work hard your entire life and pay into Social Security, it should be there for you when you retire, and you should not have to question if those paychecks will arrive, and the government should strive to improve service to you, not brag about cutting it. Basic American principles like if you serve your nation in the military, if you put your life in danger abroad, you will be respected and taken care of. You will be cherished and honored and not forced to worry that the federal employees who provide you with care, many of whom are veterans themselves, will be fired, or the benefits that you rely on will be denied, or that your health care needs won't be met. Basic American principles like your child will have access to a high-quality public education, that every child has a unique genius. Even our children, beautiful children with special needs, they have genius. And that our children can go to school and parents and teachers know that they will be safe there. At stake now are those basic American principles that the people you elect to serve you in government will represent you and not try to make themselves richer, not run some scam. And call you a sucker. These basic ideals of our nation, that everyone's rights will be equally protected and everyone will be held accountable under the law. Right now, all of this, things that make our country different, are under attack. Our constituents are asking us to acknowledge this. Everywhere I travel now, I hear from Republicans and independents and Democrats who are afraid, who are worried, who are angry. And I think about John Lewis, who taught me that fear is not something to be shunned. It's almost a signpost that you're headed in the right direction. It is something that is a necessary precondition. You cannot have great fear without great courage. John Lewis would tell us that this is a time for great courage. He would tell us that anger is a fuel. It can consume you, debilitate you, or it could fuel you to put yourself in service of others. I feel if my friend was here, if my hero was here, he would tell us and try to teach us that this is a moment to know that despair is only possible if you don't meet it as an agent of hope. If John Lewis was here, he would look at me and say, "What are you doing? What are we doing?" So tonight I rise in an unusual way. I rise with the intention to stand here until I can stand no longer, until I'm physically unable to stand anymore. I'm going to speak up. I'm going to try to cause some good trouble in this body I respect so much. I'm going to try to cause what I believe is necessary trouble. I'm going to try to honor the legacy that I know I've inherited as an American, the legacy I think about when I come to this floor and feel sometimes overwhelmed with all the sacrifice and struggle that had to get me here. Good people who caused good trouble in the face of slavery, good people who caused good trouble in the face of the denial of the right to vote, good people who caused good trouble in the cause of equal rights, good people who caused good trouble in the fight against hate, good people who caused good trouble in the fight against demagogues from McCarthy to Father Conklin to big people who showed such small character when they tried to suppress others. I want to cause good trouble and prove worthy of those who came before. This is not normal. Listen to America. Listen to Americans. They seem to always be ahead of this body. They're rising up in state after state, not along partisan lines, but as an American line. Not because they hate other Americans, but because they love America and know that what does love look like in public? It looks like justice. And there is so much injustice going on. I don't know how long I can stand, but I will stand and speak up. I want to start by reading some of these letters to try to give folk a flavor of what's happened in my office for 71 days. The calls we've gotten have gotten more and more and more numerous. I know I'm not the only one because the calls became so numerous to the Senate as a whole, it locked up the lines. The letters I'm getting, the emails I'm getting, people taking scraps of paper and just writing their hearts out and sending it in to say this is not ordinary times. These are painful times, frightening times, times where people question what's happening to America and worry that there are powerful people trying to fundamentally change our nation in a way that will hurt people to the benefit of the powerful and the wealthy. I look at these letters like this one. I won't read the name, but they say, "Hi, Senator Booker. Medicaid has saved my life many, many times. Without it, many people in America will die. Please help us." Underlined multiple times. Here's another scrap of paper where somebody writes their heart out. "Dear Senator Booker, when I got out of the Navy, I had mental illness. I needed psychiatric medicine to stop going in and out of the hospital. Because of Medicare, I have medicine that has kept me out of the hospital for 18 years. Without Medicaid and my medicine, I will wind up in the hospital." Americans telling me their most vulnerable pains, their most terrified realities are now confronting them, rendering their pride and telling their truth. Here's another one. Dear Senator Booker, I'm writing you today as a constituent. In addition to being a concerned citizen, I'm a 25-year employee of the local Board of Education and a parent of a permanently disabled daughter who has just started receiving Medicaid. Even with her master's degree, my daughter is only able to work 19 hours a week. Therefore, insurance is not provided. Medicaid is a necessity to maintain her physical and emotional health and provide services to assist with her independence so she can continue to be a contributing member of society. By withdrawing funding for Medicaid, the policy would disrupt programs serving disabled and elderly people in New Jersey and throughout the country. And Medicaid is only one area which will potentially be affected by Donald Trump's funding freeze. Please protect Social Security and Medicare for the hardworking Americans who have earned it. Social Security isn't, quote, a handout. We've paid into it with every paycheck throughout our entire working lives, and the 66 million seniors relying on Medicare could have their health care put on hold or canceled. We deserve to know these programs will be there for us. If federal grants are limited, medical and science research limited, including vaccines and disease prevention, they will all be severely impacted. The United States should be a world leader in healthcare, in education, and scientific advancement. This is an embarrassment to us as a country. It should not be possible in America for one single man, even an elected president, to stop funds which Congress has already allocated. I implore you to use your power as my senator and a key member of our government to stand up for what is important to the people of your district. We want to go to work, take care of our families, and ensure all citizens have health services they deserve. These latest orders are inappropriate, untenable, and illegal. As a senator, please take action. Please take action to defend and protect these programs. Thank you for your time. Cory Booker. Recently, it's come to my attention that my students' rights in New Jersey are under threat from new legislation. This has caused distress and uncertainty in my classroom from my students who depend on funds from Medicaid. My students depend on consistency. And a lapse in their education and care would result in regression, trauma, and worse. I teach students in New Jersey who are supported by your legislature. I teach all abilities, meaning many of the students live with ADHD, autism, and other disorders that require extra care and attention. It's my life's mission to bring what I know to those who want to learn it. I love the job I do. I love that I get to spend time with those who need it most and deliver care and education. The job that I do helps my students live more independently and achieve richer and more fulfilling lives. I live out of state, but most of my students are from the state you help legislate. My students' rights are in trouble and need you to advocate for them. I urge you to continue to fight for Medicaid. Please work to oppose any and all cuts or caps to the Medicaid program. Dear Senator Booker, my name is, I'm a registered voter in New Jersey. I'm writing today to strongly urge you and your fellow policymakers to oppose all cuts to the Medicaid program, as it is a lifeline for individuals with disabilities, oppose all cuts or caps. I was a special education teacher for 30 years. And after I retired, I volunteered as a special education advocate for 10 years. I had the privilege of advocating for many disabled children and young adults who were receiving Medicaid services. Medicaid gave many of my clients the opportunity to participate in society by providing daily life skills for independence. Skills reinforced through Medicare programs include shopping, safety, job search, speech and language, just to point out a few of the services provided by Medicaid. My clients require repetition of these skills to function in their daily lives. Without these programs provided by Medicaid, regression will occur and learned skills will not be retained. Without Medicaid, this community will struggle, isolate, and lose any quality of life they've enjoyed since receiving Medicaid services. Medicaid has made a critical difference in the lives of my clients. Cutting and capping Medicaid will have devastating consequences for them and their family. Senator, there are 1.6 million New Jersey residents with disabilities who rely on Medicaid for access to vital care, resources, and essential medications needed to survive. Please support and fight for these vulnerable New Jersey citizens. Please take action to protect these vital programs provided by Medicaid. Thank you in advance for your anticipated efforts in my request of your support for our most vulnerable residents. I'm going to rise tonight, as I said, and stay for as long as I physically can, and I'm going to go through issue area after issue area after issue area and talk specifically to the concerns, the fears, the actions taken, to the hurts that are already being felt throughout America, elevating others' voices who don't have the privilege of standing in this body, honoring those Americans who, even though they don't have such a position, they are raising their voice. I will rise for as long as I can to honor them and raise mine. The first area I want to talk about is Medicaid, Medicare, and healthcare, as my constituents spoke to. I don't need to tell anyone the importance of healthcare to humanity. Without our health, we would not be able to do anything else. We would not be able to provide for our families, spend time with our loved ones, do all of the things that make life worth living. That's why I'm going to stand here and explain to people what's going on and how our healthcare programs are at risk and being undermined. The Trump administration and Republicans in Congress are right now discussing how to cut these programs in a way of putting those savings either into tax cuts for the rich. I say either because they're going to be putting in the tax cuts for the rich, but those tax cuts, as we know, are still going to blow massive trillion-dollar holes in our deficits. They are trying to gut Medicaid and Medicare programs on which nearly a third of our country rely, all to pay for those tax cuts to billionaires and corporations. They're also dismantling the very institutions meant to safeguard our nation's health and well-being. And this is not the first time. They tried this before during Trump's first administration when he unsuccessfully tried to repeal the Affordable Care Act and cut Medicaid despite its popularity across the nation, across the political aisle. He was going after something that wasn't left or right, that Americans were saying in a chorus of conviction that this is about right or wrong. It is wrong to take away health care for millions of people. Let me explain, if I can, or speak to a few points from a recent report by Protect Our Care to explain what the administration is trying to do to our healthcare system. They want to slash almost $1 trillion, about $850 billion from Medicaid, forcing people to choose between health care and putting food on the table. In every state, hundreds of thousands of seniors, children, and working families could lose their health insurance thanks to Republican plans to cut those hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars from Medicaid. It would impose, they seek, burdensome work requirements for people on Medicaid. The last proposal coming from Republicans of that work requirement has one goal: to make it harder for people to qualify for Medicaid, to slash benefits and deny up to 36 million people access to health care so they could fund again those tax breaks for the wealthiest and for corporations. Work requirements only increase the red tape that hardworking families, already burdened by working multiple jobs, caring for children, and more, they're simply increasing the red tape working families have to go through to obtain affordable care. Their intention is also to hike premium costs. Millions of families who use private health insurance saved an average of $2,400 per year on their premiums thanks to the Inflation Reduction Act advanced premium tax cuts. But now the proposals Republicans are putting forth want to end these savings and raise costs for over 24 million Americans. The proposal wants to take away protections from people with pre-existing conditions. The GOP plans to repeal and undermine the ACA, meaning if they're successful, 135 million people with pre-existing conditions like asthma, cancer, and diabetes would lose critical protections that private insurance companies can charge them higher premiums. The efforts that they're discussing, Republicans are discussing, would raise prescription drug prices. It would stop medical research and stop medical debt relief. Over the first 3 months of his administration, Donald Trump and Republican allies have increased the prices of prescription drugs, including cancer and heart medications, as well as vital antibiotics, delayed the implementation of a Biden administration rule that barred medical debt from showing up on credit reports, cut NIH grants, halted all studies and activities within the NIH relating in any capacity to the health of LGBTQ Americans, including active research programs. And President Trump violated court orders to halt funding freezes to organizations like the NIH. Republicans rejected legislation to cap insulin costs for millions of people with diabetes nationwide. Now they want to raise costs for seniors by repealing the cap for people who rely on Medicare. As many as 1 in 4 of the 7.5 million Americans dependent on insulin are skipping or skimping on doses. I want to say that again. As 1 in 4 of the 7.5 million Americans dependent on insulin are skipping or skimping on doses. This is a life-threatening practice. No one in this country should have to bear that. This week, we know Republicans in the Senate will make us vote on a budget that will inevitably be intended to harm the strength of programs like Medicaid and vital health programs in general. Here's what a few organizations are saying about the impact of the budget that will soon be put on this floor, what impact it will have on our health systems. According to this nonpartisan Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, a nonpartisan policy and research institute, this is what they write. The House Republican budget would require deep cuts to Medicaid, and recent statements from House Energy and Commerce Chair Brett Guthrie suggest the Affordable Care Act's Medicaid expansion to adults with low incomes, which cover more than 20 million Americans, will be a prime target. Cutting Medicaid by hundreds of billions of dollars and focusing many of those cuts on the Medicaid expansion would lead millions of people to become uninsured. Eliminating Medicaid expansion was a key goal of Republicans' failed effort to repeal the ACA 8 years ago, and Congress should once again reject efforts to undermine it. Recent Republican proposals, such as reducing the federal matching rate for Medicaid expansion, repealing the 2021 Rescue Plan incentive for new states to expand, or taking away Medicaid coverage from certain adult enrollees by imposing work requirements, would leave expansion enrollees at risk. They could lose their coverage due to the work requirements, or their state might drop their coverage due to a drastic increase in state costs. 12 American states have poison pill laws that would automatically end expansion coverage or review of the coverage if the federal matching rate drops below 90%. In those states, expansion enrollees are even in graver risk. Representative Guthrie's recent statement confirms that House Republicans are eyeing proposals such as work requirements, a reduction in the federal matching rate, or a per capita cap on funding for the expansion group. This last option could shift $72 billion and $190 billion in costs from states from 2026 to 2034, putting that burden from $72 billion to $190 billion on states, increasing the state costs expansion by 41 to 108%, and thus jeopardizing medical coverage for millions. 40 states plus Washington, D.C. have adopted the Medicaid expansion. 40 states plus the District of Columbia have adopted the Medicaid expansion, helping adults with low incomes become healthier and more financially secure. Health coverage through expansion improves people's access to something that makes so much economic sense. It improves people's access to preventative care, to primary care. It also provides care for people with chronic illnesses, prevents premature deaths, and protects people from catastrophic out-of-pocket medical costs. Let me pull away from the nonpartisan group's remarks for a second, because I saw this as a mayor. When you scrimp on regular treatment for people with chronic care, when you scrimp on preventative disease, it costs more to taxpayers. I saw that because folks would end up in my emergency rooms in Newark. And the care there is so much more expensive. For a taxpayer, you get a much better deal in helping someone treat their chronic disease. You get a much better deal in giving them regular access to doctors. But to cut that makes no sense. Not only are you cutting it to give, again, those larger tax cuts to billionaires and corporations, but you're cutting it and you're just going to add even more and more to the overall healthcare costs of our country, to the size of the debt. Let me go back to the text. Having health coverage also makes it easier for adults to work or look for a job. Consider that Medicaid supports work and that 9 out of 10 Medicaid adults are already working, caring for family, attending school, or are ill or disabled. Work requirements are unnecessary, they're burdensome, they're more red tape and hassles. Proposals to use work requirements as a way to take away Medicaid coverage from certain adults are just another way to undermine Medicaid expansion. Attacks on the Medicaid expansion are often based on false claims that covering adults with low incomes takes away care from groups traditionally eligible for Medicaid. In reality, Medicaid expansion supports better outcomes for all groups, including children, older adults, and people with disabilities. Medicaid expansion has driven coverage gains for parents, which improve their access to care as well as their overall well-being, the overall well-being for their children. Stepping away from the text, there's not a parent in America that knows when you're sick, when you are being hurt by your chronic disease, it's harder to take care of children, and their well-being suffers. Back to the text. Expansion has also driven coverage gains among people with disabilities. People with disabilities who receive supplemental security insurance income generally also qualify for Medicaid. About 2 out of 3 people with disabilities who participate in Medicaid qualify on another basis, meaning Medicaid expansion is an important path to coverage for those with low incomes. Medicaid expansion also supports hospitals and other healthcare providers by reducing their uncompensated care costs and improving their operating margins, especially for rural and safety net hospitals. If all states in America were to drop the Medicaid expansion in response to a decline in federal support, a recent analysis found that the provider revenues would fall by $80 billion and uncompensated care costs would increase by $19 billion in 2026 alone. That's the end of the article. This is not a hyperbole or scare tactic. These are real possibilities. Even the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office has said there is no way to meet the Republican budget resolution dedicated cuts without cutting Medicaid or Medicare. Tonight and into tomorrow morning, I'm going to do everything I can to elevate the voices of Republicans, because this is not intended to be a partisan speech. From the Cato Institute to the Wall Street Journal, to nonpartisan groups, to the own Congressional Budget Office, everyone is pointing to what is happening as not normal, not what the president says it is, as something that's going to hurt Americans, something that's going to cost us more money in the long run. Someone's going to take people with disabilities and put them even more in the shadows and margins when they should be centralized and empowered. That what they're proposing is not just morally wrong, it actually adds to the fiscal crisis of our country. It will drive up healthcare costs in America. It'll drive up chronic disease in America. An issue so important to me, I've been fighting for it since I got here, because America, this great nation, this great land, is one of the leading countries on the planet Earth in the Western world, and leading democracies, I should say, that has maternal mortality rates that are extraordinarily high. Well, 40+% of our babies are born on Medicaid. Here's an article from NBC. Republicans can't meet their own budget targets without cutting Medicare or Medicaid. House Republicans can't meet their own budget target that is necessary to pass President Donald Trump's legislative agenda without making significant cuts to Medicare or Medicaid, the official budget scorekeeper confirmed on Wednesday. House Republicans adopted a budget blueprint last week that opens the door to pass Donald Trump's policy priorities on immigration, energy, and taxes. It instructs the House Energy and Commerce Committee to cut spending under its jurisdiction by $880 billion. The Congressional Budget Office, a nonpartisan in-house think tank that referees the process, said that when Medicare is set aside, the total funding under the committee's jurisdiction is $8.8 trillion over the next 10 years. Medicaid accounts for $8.2 trillion of that, or 93%. When Medicare and Medicaid are excluded, the committees oversee a total of $581 billion in spending, much less than the $880 billion target, the CBO said. The letter outlining the figures was in response to a query by, I take away from the article for a second, by my friend and longtime New Jerseyan, Representative Frank Pallone. He's the ranking member of the Energy and Commerce Committee, and Brendan Doyle, a Democrat of Pennsylvania, the ranking member of the Budget Committee. They asked the question. That leaves Republicans in a deep predicament. The budget resolution adopted by the slimmest of margins in a narrowly divided House was the delicate product of negotiations amongst conservative hardliners who demand steep budget cuts, and swing district GOP lawmakers who say they don't want to slash funding for health programs their constituents rely on. Off the article for a second, God bless you for caring about your constituents. Reversing the target would mean upsetting one of those factions and potentially risking the support of key votes to pass the eventual budget reconciliation bill that advances Trump agenda. Democrats have made protecting Medicaid a centerpiece of their attack on the party line GOP agenda, accusing Trump of trying to cut health care for the working class to pay for tax cuts for the wealthy. The letter from the CBO confirms what we've been saying all along. The math doesn't work without devastating Medicaid cuts, Pallone said Wednesday in a statement. Republicans know their spin is a lie. And the truth is they have no problem taking health care away from millions of Americans so that the rich can get richer and pay less in taxes than they already do. You see, stepping away from this, they are saying we're going to make these cuts to balance the budget, but their budget blows a bigger hole in our deficit. If this is what Trump said, then why are they proposing to cut $880 billion from critical health care programs like Medicaid, Medicare, and Children's Health Insurance Program? You can't have it both ways. Donald Trump promised to make America healthy again. But gutting health care for millions of Americans, rolling back health care for millions of Americans, rolling back support for new mothers, slashing innovative cancer treatments, this doesn't help families. I love what Dr. King said. Martin Luther King famously stated, of all the forms of inequality, injustice in health is the most shocking and inhumane. Of all the forms of inequality, injustice in health is the most shocking and inhumane. Paul Farmer, extraordinary leader, physician, anthropologist, renowned humanitarian, pioneer of global health. I read his book, Mountains Beyond Mountains. In another one of his books, Pathologies of Power, Health, Human Rights, and the New War on the Poor, he wrote, and I quote, if access to health care is considered a human right, who is considered human enough to have that right? I think in a country this wealthy, where we are seeing stratospheric wealth created here in individuals, we're seeing some of the richest people in the world, and yet we still are targeting, for tax breaks for them, we're targeting millions and millions of Americans who rely on things like Medicare. I started my speech with John Lewis. Let me quote him now. In 2012, he said, healthcare is a right and it is not a privilege, not just for some people, but for all people. John Lewis was a visionary. So let me tell you a bit more about Medicaid. If you're watching, let me break it down and show just how critical it is for millions of Americans. Medicaid right now is in the crosshairs of many, many Republicans in Congress. It's on this precipice. It's not abstract policy. It's not just numbers and a line item in a budget. At stake when you talk about Medicare is millions and millions of Americans' health. It goes to this question is, how deeply do we care for one another? I love what our founders said in the Declaration of Independence. At the very end of that, they say we must mutually pledging to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Are we living up to that when we are saying we're going to take away health care from millions of Americans in order to have greater tax cuts? You see, people want to just say, oh, it's a government program, as if that's a slur, when really it's something that we, the people, in order to create a more perfect union, created as a lifeline to tens of millions of Americans that, but for programs like this, would be succumbing to diseases, succumbing to ill health, and we as an entire country would suffer. Think about this not as that slur where they try to call this in ways that try to shift public opinion away from human beings, fellow Americans, our patriots. Think of it instead as a lifeline. It is the reason a child with asthma can breathe easier. It is the reason a senior can receive the care they need in a nursing home, or elders. It is the reason a low-income mother can take her child in for vaccinations, or a person with a disability can live with dignity and independence. Congress is entertaining proposals now. Conversations are being had in this building and in Senate and House office buildings about how we can gut programs. God, I wish somebody said in a bipartisan way, let's come together and find healthcare savings. I offered that. I literally said to the now Secretary of Health, I told stories about private sector folks who saved money by expanding access to food, to healthy, fresh food. Let's save that, because I know private sector companies that have bent their cost curves, saved money, not by cutting health care, but by giving people better access to nutritious, healthy foods. You are what you eat. We're not coming up with bipartisan proposals to save money, to create efficiencies, to do things that can make programs run better. Heck, when I was mayor, we were able to lower expenditures, create more efficiency, have more happier customer service. There are ways to do that, but no, this is folks coming with an axe to cut your health care, or your neighbor's health care, or your elder's health care. It's not a government program. It's a commitment we make to each other in the greatest nation on the planet Earth. We say we'll take care of our children. We say we'll take care of expectant mothers. We say we'll take care of our own. But they passed that House budget resolution. Republicans who called themselves moderates or budget hawks, they all voted for it except for one who had the crazy thing to do in Washington, to tell the truth. Massey said that by their own numbers, this don't add up. What they're pushing on the American people is going to steal from the future generations by racking up trillions of debt. He stood on principle. They're not even doing what they're telling us they're going to do. $880 billion in Medicaid funding cuts. It's not trimming the fat. It's not founding efficiencies. It's not a plan to cut out any possible corruption. It is to make children and expectant mothers and seniors and people with disabilities have a harder time accessing health care, which we already said that Martin Luther King, of all the forms of inequality, injustice in health care, is the most shocking and inhumane. Not bigotry, not poverty, two things he fought so nobly against. He said the most inhumane, the most unjust, are what we're talking about here. Take away access to health care from children, take away access to health care from our elders, take away access to health care to people with chronic diseases. Why? Why? To cut the deficit? Well, there's some Republicans willing to tell the truth. It's not going to cut the deficit. To take from the poor and give it to the rich and powerful? Well, we know the rich and powerful will get bigger tax cuts. They're not shrinking the governments, folks. They're creating bigger and bigger governmental obligations. And what do they mean? When you look at 10 years out and have trillions and trillions and trillions of more, it means that future generations, or maybe 10 years from now, that their debt payments are going to grow more and more and more, taking away more money that we have as a collective body, as Americans, to invest in scientific research, to invest in cutting-edge medical technology. So let's be clear. Let's be clear. Children from low-income families would lose access to routine checkups, vaccinations, and emergency care. Seniors who depend on Medicaid for long-term care, many of whom are already exhausting their life savings, would be left without options. People with disabilities who require constant medical attention, specialized equipment, and home-based services would face uncertainty and loss of those services. And let us not forget the low-income adults who gain coverage through Medicaid expansion, who work hard every day. They got Medicaid expansion, access to Medicaid through expansion under the Affordable Care Act. For them, this is not ideology. For them, this is not political philosophy. For them, this is life or death. It's about survival. These proposed cuts would also devastate the very infrastructure of our healthcare system. I've heard this from hospitals. Again, Republicans and Democratic leaders in my state who know our hospitals are speaking to this injustice. Medicare provides nearly 19% of all hospital revenue. It allows rural hospitals already on the brink to keep their doors open. Rural hospitals. It would take safety net hospitals that serve uninsured and underinsured populations. Without Medicaid, with these cuts, these institutions would crumble. That's not rhetoric. I've talked to my safety net hospital. I did an event, and I remember the fear in this hospital administrator's eyes, who lives every day to help the poor, to help the uninsured. In many ways, we share a faith. And I know he believes he's answering the highest calling of his country and his faith, to help those who come with nothing. Because when hospitals close, when Medicaid staff lose their jobs, entire communities lose access to care. Ambulances end up having to drive farther and farther. Wait times increase. Lives are at risk. The ripple effects are vast. Schools will suffer when children with disabilities lose access to Medicaid-supported services like physical therapy, transportation, and mental health support. Children's ability to learn and thrive is compromised. Schools in rural areas where Medicaid often funds on-site nurses and telehealth programs, they would be stripped of essential support. What we are witnessing is again, don't get caught in this Washington parlance. This is not a normal time. This is a threat to millions of Americans. It's not a budgetary proposal. It is like the metaphorical sword of Damocles. It is people all over this country who are beginning to see what this really means. It's an economic crisis that would be rolled upon states and rural areas and communities and cities. It is a moral crisis that speaks to the soul of our nation. It is a deliberate, calculated and being calculated right now, it is a deliberate and calculated attack on health care for Americans in order, again, to give tax cuts to the wealthy. If the enhanced federal match for Medicaid is limited, one of the things on the chopping block, states would be forced to absorb the difference, an estimated $88 billion every year. That is a 29% increase in state-funded Medicare spending per resident. To fill those holes, states would be left with impossible choices: either raise taxes or slash services. Education, infrastructure, public safety. For them, they would have to figure out where to get the money from, or else they'd be slashing services. It's an unholy choice. Cutting Medicare doesn't make us stronger. It will weaken our economy. It will raise healthcare costs for everyone and push millions of Americans into crises that will ripple and radiate through their lives, their families' lives, their work lives. Hospitals will pass unpaid bills onto insured patients. Healthcare premiums will rise. People will delay care, omit medications, and then show up in emergency rooms later more sick and therefore more expensive to treat. And in the end, who pays for it? Who pays for this moral failure, this financial failure? Who pays for it? We do. The American people. And who gets rich on this? Well, I know the last tax cut that they want to extend, the people who will make the most money off of this system and this cuts because of the tax cuts they will get will be billionaires and working families in America. People who paying insurance rates hurts, is hard, is difficult. People who have high premiums and co-pays. It's the rest of us that pay. So I want to talk about the people at risk. There's nearly 12 million people who qualify for both Medicare and Medicaid, our nation's most vulnerable. They'd lose critical wraparound services like long-term care, dental care, vision, and non-emergency transportation, services that are not luxuries for these folks, but they're lifelines. A higher share of those with both Medicaid and Medicare have cognitive impairments and conditions like Alzheimer's, and God, my father who had dementia. We're a well-off family. I saw the challenges, the resources, the drains, the physical challenges for his primary caregiver, my mother. Millions of Americans, though, would rely on Medicaid, and they would face devastating choices. Quit their jobs to provide full care, full-time care, or leave their loved ones while they go off to work on a job without the support they need. When it comes to Alzheimer's and dementia, I know personally you cannot leave someone without the care. Nursing homes may be forced to shut their doors or cut staffing levels to dangerous lows. In fact, people who can't take care of their elders, they might be going to nursing homes, which again increases costs for taxpayers. Home health care services, often the only thing keeping people in their communities out of institutions, that would disappear. This would be a crisis for elder care. This would be a crisis for disability services. What it is, when a nation isn't taking care of its elders, it's a crisis of our national character. Medicaid also plays a profound role in the success of children and their well-being. Nearly half of all children in the U.S. are covered by Medicaid and CHIP. Research shows that when children have access to care, they are more likely to stay in school, graduate, and earn more as adults. That's not surprising to people, just to think it through. It's true. If kids have access to health care, they succeed more in life. Medicaid helps diagnose learning disorders, treat chronic conditions, and ensure children don't fall behind simply because they are born into poverty. It's essential to the American dream, that just because you're poor, it shouldn't affect your destiny. And for us to be the America of which we speak, a child born in poverty shouldn't have their future cut off because they can't get the health care to empower them to thrive. Talk to any school district in any state, in any county. Those resources are necessary to help children. Medicaid pays for nearly half of the births in the United States. The United States, as I said earlier, has this shameful distinction of a massive maternal health crisis. We have the highest rate of maternal deaths of any high-income nation. I'm going to say that again. America has the highest rates of maternal deaths, women dying in childbirth or in the days after, of any nation. A majority of these maternal deaths take place during that postpartum period, the days after birth. For years, I have fought for Medicaid to provide coverage for women for up to 1 year postpartum instead of just 60 days. In 2022's Congress, I was so happy that states had the option to expand Medicaid coverage for up to 1 year postpartum. It is one of the solutions to this maternal healthcare crisis that expert after expert after expert says. Just make sure those women who gave birth are not knocked off of healthcare after 2 months. As of this January, 49 states plus the District of Columbia have expanded postpartum Medicaid coverage past those 60 days. Hey, we're stepping in the right direction to show that we love our moms. We value those life givers that are mothers. We value them. But cutting Medicare means potentially eliminating the progress we made towards ending that maternal mortality crisis. There's just no justifying that in a nation this great and this wealthy. We talk so much about children and motherhood. All of us should be coming together about this maternal health crisis, but what's happening now, again, is the very program that's helped us to begin to address this is under attack. When we invest in Medicaid, we are investing in the future, in children who grow up to be healthier, in seniors who age with dignity, in rural communities with limited access to health care and services, in families who don't have to choose between a prescription and rent. This is about health, but I want to tell you, for all those doing the math at home, you cannot have a thriving economic engine without good health care. The two are incompatible. Widespread sickness, illness, and disease, and people who can't get their health issues covered, takes away from our economic strength. In fact, just cutting Medicaid would cost jobs, nurses' aides, support staff, medical technicians. Entire communities depend on funding that Medicaid provides. Cutting it would destabilize state budgets, force those impossible trade-offs, and widen the gap between the richest in our country and the rest. A gap that's already widening at stunning rates. These cuts are not about efficiency. Don't let anybody tell you these cuts are about efficiency. I know a lot about making government more efficient. This is not about innovation. There's so many things that we as a country should be doing to deal with medical innovation. And I'll be the first to say, Republicans and Democrats have failed to step up to the 21st century and do things that really can create more efficiencies in our healthcare system. I really hope to see more bold thinkers about creating real efficiency. But what they're doing now is not about efficiency. It's not about innovation. It's not about the heart priorities of Americans who know everything that I'm saying. The letters I've gotten, Republicans and Democrats and independents in my state, scared people, they know what this is about. Republicans in New Jersey who run hospitals know what this is about. This should be a bipartisan strategy to how do we make our society more healthy and less dependent on healthcare. And when it comes to healthcare, heck, let's not do the stupid things like cutting scientific and biosciences and the research that often leads to medical breakthroughs. Let's come together and figure out how to deliver services more efficiently. Making Americans healthier, I don't believe them. They're cutting access for kids to fresh and healthy foods. They're cutting school lunch resources. There's a way to do this that should be bringing the best ideas from both sides of the aisle to deal with these issues, but that's not what they're doing. Every data point, every story, hospitals from rural areas to urban areas, everyone is saying the same thing and illustrating the same point. Medicaid is critical to the health of some of the most vulnerable Americans. It's critical to our elders, to our children, to our mothers. It is a lifeline for more than 72 million people. With control of the Senate, the House, and the presidency, Republicans have the opportunity to dream big. They have an opportunity to lead with a vision for better health in America. To come before the people and Congress and hearings and say, this is our vision for American health and well-being. We're going to show what some private companies did. They cut their health care costs and improved the health of their citizens, of their employees by providing better access to food. There are so many good ideas that I've learned when I was mayor from Republicans, from private sector people. But those aren't the ideas that are coming forward. The ideas that are coming forward is, hey, let's just send to the Energy and Commerce Committee the mandate to cut $880 billion. Let's rush now. Let's get it done before our narrow majority somehow gets undermined. Let's just cut. And in the end, what's the result? Americans get sicker, driving up overall health care costs, all to give billionaires more of a tax cut. I know the character of so many of my friends in this body on both sides of the aisle. This is not who we are. It is not who we are. But God, there's no big vision. There's no big dream for health care. Instead of improving Medicaid and increasing funding, as 42% of Americans support, they want to make extraordinary cuts that will demolish a program. They are proposing that $880 billion cut from Medicaid, taking health care away from millions of Americans. They want to impose work requirements, even though 90% of Medicaid beneficiaries are already working or cannot work for legitimate reasons. Arkansas actually tried this. I love case studies. They tried this in 2017, and the results were disastrous. People lost coverage that they shouldn't have, and employment didn't increase. Nationally, such requirements could put 36 million people at risk of losing their health care. They're proposing failed policies, not breakthrough ideas, not a bold vision that I know is in America's heart. This repeal that some folks are saying that they want to do to save money, a hatred for previous president. They want to repeal Biden-era rules that made Medicaid and CHIP enrollment easier, less red tape, easier for seniors and children. Let's repeal that, they say. They want to end a rule requiring minimum staffing standards in nursing homes, including 24/7 access to registered nurses, one of the hardest, most underappreciated jobs in America. Let's get less access to these noble, noble professionals. They propose per capita caps that would upend Medicaid's financing model in every state, leaving states with less money to meet their residents' needs. And in states that expanded Medicaid under the ACA, these cuts could jeopardize coverage for 20 million people who gained access. The budget that they're proposing would require deeper cuts. Speaker Johnson claims these changes are about rooting out fraud, waste, and abuse. But that's not what's happening, folks. What's happening is an assault on a program that provides dignity, health, and stability, economic growth, improved outcomes for kids, more respect for our elders, care for the disabled. Nearly 2 million New Jerseyans, 2 million people in my state rely on Medicaid. And yet, our state is slated to see cuts of up to $5.2 billion. Medicaid accounts for a quarter, more than a quarter of New Jersey's state budget. Think about that. It accounts for more than a quarter of our state's budget. In my state, one of the hardest working states that's out there, just their work requirement would put about 700,000 of my neighbors, my fellow statespeople, at risk of losing their health care. Medicaid covers about 1/5 of hospital spending. At University Hospital in Newark, New Jersey's only level 1 trauma center, more than $149 million in potential cuts loom. I know this hospital. I have been there when my officers have been injured. I've been there when my firefighters in Newark were injured. I've been there when heroic citizens are injured and brought there. It is our level 1 trauma center. People from all around our region are sent there. These emergency room workers are incredible. Heck, they've treated me coming out of an emergency. And they're facing $149 million in cuts. And their leadership, knowing how vital that hospital it is, how that hospital stands in the breach between life and death, health and illness, they know what it would mean. We should be strengthening this program through innovations that come from people on both sides of the aisle. We should be coming together as a body and saying, okay, let's spitball this, let's put up the best ideas in America to make things more efficient. Oh, wait a minute, you mean if we treat chronic diseases with access to healthy food, we might actually be able to lower diabetes rates, lower hypertension rates, lower obesity rates? Well, that's one great way to make this investment happen. You mean there is technology and innovation that's happening right now with our best scientists that could create better access to telehealth, it could create more efficiency in medical records, it could cut down on mistakes that are still made in medical care, like combining the wrong drugs or other challenges that up costs. There's systems that we could create that could create more transparency and eliminate more real fraud and go after the fraudsters themselves in a more efficient manner. There are so many things that we could do if we came together as a body, but what are we doing instead? Following our president that wants his tax cuts renewed. What did those tax cuts do the first time around? Most of the benefits went to the wealthiest people and corporations. And it drove trillions of dollars, the largest deficit growth that we have seen in a generation. Rapacious, misguided budgeting, creating bigger and bigger debt payments. I remind you, Clinton, balanced budget. Bush, the first president in American history that didn't call for the common sacrifice to go to war. We spent trillions of dollars in those foreign wars, and guess what, he said? No common sacrifice, only about 1% of our people will fight in those wars. I'm going to give you a tax cut. Well, that makes no sense. You're going to drive up deficits that my children will have to pay for. Obama comes along, and at least he lowers his deficit spending, but then Trump comes in and increases it by trillions of dollars on the backs of working Americans to give those benefits to the wealthiest. And now, Biden, who shrunk the deficit a bit, didn't eliminate it, still spent what any fiscally prudent person might say is really problematic. Let's not make this blindly partisan. But for anybody who would criticize Biden and follow Trump into what he's doing with this budget proposal that's going to slash health care for millions of Americans, increase the deficit by trillions and trillions of dollars, and make Elon Musk richer and richer? Is that your solution? It violates our values. It violates our national character. It violates the highest principles put forth by the most noble people in American history. And I stand today, and I will not sit down for hours and hours if God gives me the ability to stand here, because I want to read the voices of Americans. I want to share their voices in this body. I want it to echo in history. I want it to be recorded by these extraordinary people who stand here every day and record my words and my colleagues' words. I want it to be in the congressional record. I want her story. Deanna's daughter is disabled, and Medicaid provides her with life-saving medications, medical equipment, orthotics, and multiple specialists for her rare disease diagnosis. She has life-threatening seizures and requires rescue seizure medications, oxygen and CPR, and has nurses that accompany her to school and meet her medical needs during the day so that she can go to work. Deanna is terrified. She uses this word. She is terrified of her daughter losing her Medicaid. She's so afraid, she's literally talking openly about going to Canada and asking for asylum there so that her daughter has the health care needs met. That is outrageous to me, that an American who's fearful for their child would think about fleeing to Canada for better health care. Wendy and Cassie. Wendy is the mother, and she wrote about the threats that Medicaid cuts would pose to her daughter, Cassie. Cassie is 32-year-old. She has Rett syndrome, RTT, a rare neurological disorder that significantly impairs even basic motor functions, requiring the individual to have lifelong care and supervision. Without Medicaid funding, Cassie and Wendy would not be able to afford housing, the day program, the prescriptions that she needs on a daily basis. Tanya and Cameron, Tanya uses Medicare and Medicaid to care for her son, her beloved child, Cameron. Cameron is battling stage 4 cancer and is confined to a wheelchair. Due to the severity of his illness, he cannot be without his cancer treatment and prescription medication. Medicare and Medicaid coverage is, for them, they say, a matter of life and death for Cameron. Here's this amazing group in New Jersey, in Cherry Hill. Amazing group. The Cherry Hill Free Clinic. Volunteers sustain the Cherry Hill Free Clinic. Doctors that give up their own time because they are driven by the conviction that in America we take care of each other, we love each other. And when you say love your neighbor, love requires sacrifice and service. These doctors and professionals that volunteer their time at the Cherry Hill Clinic, I just want to tell you, God bless you. Thank you for living our American values and the values of your faith traditions. The Cherry Hill Free Clinic provides free health care, treatment, and medication to low-income individuals, not just in Cherry Hill, but throughout New Jersey. Without the support of Medicare and Medicaid coverage for their parents, the free clinic would not be able to provide the extent of services and care that their patients desperately need. They would not be able to be the source of light to so many people that are facing scary darkness, think that it's not going to happen to me, that cancer diagnosis, it's not going to happen to me, that rare disease that affects the child, it's not going to happen to me. But when it does, and they can't imagine how they will make ends meet, they find in the Cherry Hill Clinic doctors and medical professionals willing to step up, and they've been doing extraordinary things that would make every American proud, and now they see what's coming from this Republican, from this Donald Trump proposal. Jean is an awesome soul. She's a disabled citizen. She relies on Medicaid coverage for her frequent hospitalizations. Without Medicaid, she would be unable to receive the critical care that she needs. God bless you, Jean. Susan writes to us. She's a disabled person who's confined to a wheelchair. Susan relies on Medicaid for her health care. Medicaid provides her wheelchair transportation to get her to her medical appointments. Without Medicaid, she would not have medical coverage or the transportation means to receive the essential health care. Edna's 98. God bless her. 98. What a life. And now, as a 98-year-old, she now has dementia. Her daughter is 78 years old. And I can't imagine this moment when you realize at 78 that you can't any longer care for your 98-year-old mom due to her worsening dementia. Edna received Medicaid coverage and is now able to have full-time care at a rehabilitation center for senior citizens. Her daughter, at 78 years old, is so grateful to live in a country that her 98-year-old mom can be in a rehabilitation care center. But they know what savage cuts in Medicaid would do. Randy and Dylan. Randy enrolled her son Dylan in Medicaid. Dylan is 10. He's wheelchair bound due to Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Dylan requires frequent medical care and daily heart medications to prevent illness with his heart functioning. To prevent the issues with his heart functioning, forgive me. Randy relies on Medicaid to provide medical care for Dylan, who Randy loves so much. Medicaid covers the costs and his critical prescription medications. And then there's Teresa, who recently lost her job and required urgent medical assessments due to a medical issue that was discovered by her doctor. During what was a difficult time, where you go to the doctor and the doctor discovers something that is so urgent that you need immediate support, Teresa was without insurance and needed to receive care as instructed by her doctor. Due to her enrollment in Medicaid, she was able to receive the diagnosis, the diagnostic testing that she needed. It's a good story, but stories like that will become more difficult. Pamela writes that Medicaid is essential to her 22-year-old son's life. He has epilepsy, cerebral palsy, vision impairment, and too many other complex medical issues for Pam to list to us. Medicaid provides his health benefits and is his funding source to attend his day program and receive therapies. Private duty nursing comes to his home, and it pays for vital medications. She writes to me that our private insurance is not enough to cover our son's complex medical needs. We would need to be able to pay for his monthly prescription costs. We would not be able to pay for his monthly prescription costs, nor the lengthy hospital stays when he's sick. We would not have the nursing hours to support his care for him to be able to continue to live at home, nor would we be able to leave home on weekdays and have a day program to attend. Pamela writes, as his parent, I need to take an early retirement from public school teaching to care for our son because the medical coverage he has just isn't enough. It doesn't provide for his transportation and his day program. So she's leaving her job early. She writes, and she bolds this, our disabled community members and their families deserve better. Medicaid provides for a bare minimum existence. And she has a message for the lies being told by too many. She says, there are no excesses here in my house. Sally and Mike. We rely on Medicaid for our 2 adult children with disabilities for long-term care, especially for my daughter who just finished her 2.5-year chemo treatment regime. We will need it for monthly checkups and prevention of a relapse. We use the funding to provide the much-needed care she needs at home. We also have 90-plus-year-old parents who need Medicaid in order to survive. We are the real sandwich generation, caring for 2 adult children with special needs and 2 very elderly parents who couldn't survive on their own. Please do everything in your power to help fund and not cut Medicaid in any way. Thank you for your time and your commitment in helping the more vulnerable population. I mean, Sally and Mike, you're not alone. That sandwich generation, taking care of children and parents, you're taking care of adult children and 90-plus-year-old parents. I hear you. I hear you. Carol, my son Jason is 41 and autistic. He has severe behavioral issues. Medicaid has enabled my son to attend a day program 3 days a week. The program bills Medicaid for his participation. We would not have the financial resources to pay for my son's day program. Medicaid helps us to use our son's living at home with his loved ones, not in a group home. We save the state money by taking care of him. Do not cut this vital program. Rosemary. Now, Rosemary says that she has an adult son, and that son has CP, a seizure disorder, cystic. This is where maybe I should have gone to medical school and not law school. Cystic encephalomalacia. My cousin, the doctor, is here. She would be able to help me if she was down here. But it is her adult son is on the autism spectrum. Yet he earned a BA. On the autism spectrum and lives independently, but with our support, and works a part-time job. She put independently in quotes. If he loses his Medicaid coverage, he will not be able to afford to live where he lives, or most importantly, he will not be able to afford his meds. He has medications that would run $500 a month. We live with the anxiety. We live with that anxiety that millions of Americans live with, that erodes them, that burns at their spirit. That anxiety that has put millions of Americans into bankruptcy, that anxiety that I can't afford my medications, that anxiety that I can't care for my children, that anxiety that I won't have that resources, that anxiety. We live with the anxiety of Medicaid cuts. With every report about what House Republicans are doing, we support anything that can be done to maintain Medicaid. Please, Senator. Danielle. She writes that I'm the oldest sibling to my 2 younger brothers, Matt and Christian, who have been living with a rare neuromuscular disease since they were diagnosed as babies. Throughout their lives, Matt and Chris, along with my parents and family, have fought to ensure that they have the best care possible, despite how unknown and under-researched their condition is. Taking Medicaid away from them would strip Matt and Christian of basic access to specialized care that they rely on, and therefore strip them of their dignity and their independence. As someone who has had a front row seat watching 2 people I love suffer from a neuromuscular condition, and as a human being who believes in the right to access medical care, I implore our representatives and the Trump administration to consider the devastating impact that these cuts would have on people like my brothers. Slashing funds for an already underfunded program is not only the wrong target in the name of, quote, efficiency, but also a decision that would cement our nation's treacherous path toward becoming a nation that does not seek justice for all. Instead, a nation that only serves those in power, only serves the powerful, only serves the wealthy. As your constituent affected by neuromuscular disease, I am concerned about the potential unintended consequences of the efforts to so-called reform Medicaid. 72 million Americans rely on Medicaid for affordable, accessible, and state health coverage, including children, pregnant women, parents, seniors, and individuals with disabilities. Any effort to reform Medicaid should not inadvertently prevent patients from having access to the health care that they deserve. Danielle, I hear you. Judith, she goes right to the point. Please stop Trump. Please stop Trump now. He is going after Medicaid. I have an adult, severely autistic granddaughter who relies on Medicaid for her special needs program. A country is judged by how it meets the needs of the weakest people, she writes. Please stop him. I want to read your words again, Judith. A country is judged by how it meets the needs of the weakest people. A country is judged by how it meets the needs of the weakest people. Elizabeth writes, Medicaid helps me access health care and direct supports in my home and my community. Cuts to Medicaid would mean I wouldn't have the services I need to live on my own with supports and would be forced to live in a more restrictive setting. Sandra writes, Medicaid has allowed my son's needs to be met at home and not in a group home. It has allowed my husband to participate in his caregiving, not a stranger. It has allowed him to be employed with the aid of a job coach. These are just a few things in addition to health care. If the cuts to Medicaid happen, it goes away. Alicia, Medicaid provides health care and services to my developmentally disabled adult child. If Medicare funding is cut, my son will not have the health care they need and the programs to attend. Maggie, my 28-year-old son, Will, has Down syndrome. He currently lives in a full and active, inclusive life. His life is full. His life is active. He's in the community where he's cherished. He lives in the community he's cherished. He has wonderful support staff and lots of activities that keep him healthy and happy. His days include volunteering at a senior citizen center, working at the local gym, shopping, leisure activities, speech therapy. He does music therapy. We follow the self-direction model, which is work on my end, but I would not have it any other way. But if Medicare funding is cut, these cuts would impact his livelihood. Nibble. Without my Medicaid, I would not be able to be as mobile nor independent. Without Medicaid evaluating my physical disability, cerebral palsy, and related limitations, and prescribing me an electric power wheelchair for daily independence and assistance with mobility, and even pain management due to not being able to walk well, I am actually up for a new wheelchair this year, as it was allowable every 5 years for a new wheelchair prescription. Without my Medicaid, I would not have been properly diagnosed with things like sleep apnea in 2017. I now use a CPAP machine to force air into my body so I can sleep peacefully instead of gasping for air at night. Without my Medicaid, I would not be able to be fitted for a leg brace for my physical support and mobility, enabling me to actually stand up straight and walk without my wheelchair. Without my Medicaid, I would not be able to be a full-time employee, a full-time worker. Laura, Medicaid has provided my sister with benefits to help support her medical and mental health issues since she graduated high school. She is now 33 and living with me and my husband after being separated from our parents that are now in assisted living and nursing home arrangements. Wow. Susan has never worked or been married because of her mental disability, and she is dependent on her Medicaid benefits. Please keep these benefits in place for people like my sister who don't have much in their lives they can depend on. Laura, your sister's now living with you. After being separated from your parents who are now in a nursing home. I see you. Michael, I need Medicaid because it provides me the ability to get my anxiety medication and to afford my therapist. I use Medicaid for medical, dental, and visual visits. I wear glasses. Without Medicaid, I am unable to live or function in this world. Robin, Courtney is my 35-year-old daughter with severe disabilities. From 2009 to present, she has needed crucial surgeries, as well as medications and hospital stays. Medicaid has made the financial support for these procedures possible. It has saved her life, and I can tell from her letter that Robin loves her 35-year-old daughter, Courtney. Mary, Medicaid is helping to improve my daughter's life through the services of the Division of Developmental Disabilities. Without it, she would be left to whittle away at home 7 days a week with no community interaction. She is learning pre-vocational skills in a manner that she is validated and viewed as a person with strengths. Thank you, Mary. Allison, I'm my daughter's caregiver in New Jersey. Medicaid-funded programs allow her to remain an active part of our community at home with her family. If Medicaid is cut, we would lose our health care. It would be devastating. Gihan, my daughter has a disability. Through Medicaid, she receives a lot of services to help her improve and progress, also to help her stay active and social. She gets speech therapy, occupational and physical therapy. People come to her home to help her as well. If Medicaid cuts happen, she will stop all the services she receives, and her life will be threatened. Please, she must keep her Medicaid because as a parent, I don't know what I can do with my daughter if that is happening. It will be so hard for her and us. Roseanne, Medicaid has supplied the nurses that take care of my daughter, of my disabled granddaughter I'm raising at home instead of being sent to an institution. She will put her life at risk for a medical emergency or fatal injury without nurses here. Ash, my daughter takes speech therapy, occupational and physical therapy, and tutoring. So, if that is all gone, she will stop progress, and she will be more disabled, and will be unable to do anything by herself or live inadvertently. She needs a lot of help, and if these Medicaid cuts happen, I don't know what I will do with her, and it'll make life so hard. These Americans are facing challenges that I can't imagine. And what's amazing about so many of them is they find the goodness and the decency of their neighbors, of people who are helping and supporting them, of people who do the jobs, the occupations that many Americans would find incredibly challenging. The occupational therapist, the physical therapist, the person who does the transportation, the nurses that take care of folks. It is a community of people out there that are trying to make our nation stand for what we say we do. They are trying to show that we are a loving and caring and compassionate community. And what I love is that this is not partisan. I keep saying this over and over again. For this whole time I could stand, I hope it's as many hours as possible, I'm going to be bringing in the voices of Republicans and Democrats because this is not a partisan issue. Maybe it is in Congress, but the Republicans and Democrats of America don't want Medicaid cuts. They especially don't want them to benefit the richest amongst us who don't need more help. God bless them. They're doing all right. And it's not going to solve our budget problems. Their budget proposal, as was said by the one lone Republican who voted against it, because he's such a fiscal hawk, he said if you just read their own numbers, this is a lie. A sham. It increases the deficit by trillions. But let me go to some Republicans. Joe Lombardo, the governor of Nevada. An abrupt reduction in federal funding would not only disrupt care for those who rely on Medicaid, but it would also destabilize public and private health care providers, leading to workforce reductions, service limitations, and financial strain on an already overburdened health care facilities. Governor of Nevada knows it. My mom, my aunt, my uncle, my other aunt, they live in Nevada. My mom lives in a retirement community there. This governor knows that that state would be hit so hard by a reduction of these services, it would be like an impact that ripples out throughout the state, raising costs, lowering care, hurting Americans, hurting Nevadans. My colleague, Mike Rounds of South Dakota, said, that's not a cost-cutting measure, that's a cost transfer, he said. And when you've got partnerships with states, you shouldn't be doing that without having them involved in the discussion. I tell you, I have conversations with lots of my Republican colleagues, and I appreciate this quote from one of them. Coalition of State Medical Associations writes, on behalf of 50 state medical associations and the District of Columbia, the hundreds of thousands of physicians we represent, I'm adding this, I am sure of both political parties and independents, back to what they write, and the 80 million Medicaid patients we serve, we are united in urging the United States Senate to protect Medicaid from the devastating $880 billion cuts in spending out targets in the House budget resolution. If these cuts are enacted, millions of Medicaid patients will lose their coverage, and we expect all Medicaid patients to lose some of their existing benefits. All Medicaid patients to lose some of their existing benefits and access to essential health care services. The American Academy of Pediatrics, Children's Defense Fund, Children's Hospital Association, Family Voices National, First Focus Campaign for Children, the March of Dimes, and National Association of Pediatric Nurse Partnerships. They all came together to jointly write, by reducing vital support for Medicaid and CHIP, you would not just be cutting a budget line, you would be limiting the health prospects of our children, leaving them without the care they need to grow into healthy adults. AARP. More than half all the funds for long-term care in America come from Medicaid. As our country gets older, and as millions of baby boomers continue to age, our country is on the brink of a serious long-term care crisis. AARP would welcome the long overdue debate about how to address the challenge, which should involve reforms to remove Medicaid's bias towards institutional care and increase support for families who take care of their loved ones at home. Large-scale cuts, however, threaten millions of seniors with disruption to the care they need. Listen to AARP. We would welcome the long overdue debate. We would welcome the long overdue debate on how to address this challenge. But we're not having a long overdue debate. We're not bringing together the world's most deliberative body to focus on how to solve these problems. Michael Tuffin, the president and CEO of AHIP, America's Health Insurance Plans, Medicaid is indispensable to low-income people and working families. If their Medicaid coverage is disrupted, these Americans will lose access to primary care and be unable to fill prescriptions for drugs to treat chronic illnesses. Many will end up in the emergency room, the costliest of site of care. Loss of Medicaid coverage means people will be less healthy, and the care will ultimately cost more. Rick Pollack, who's the president and CEO of American Hospital Association, on behalf of the hospitals, nurses, doctors, and those who care for and serve the needs of 72 million patients that rely on Medicaid, we urge you to consider the implications hinging on the budget reconciliation bill's fate on removing health care for millions of our nation's patients. These are hardworking families, children, seniors, veterans, disabled individuals who rely on essential care services. We ask the House to construct a path forward that protects Medicaid from these harmful cuts that would impact the care for millions of Americans. We did Republican governors. Here's a Democrat, Colorado Governor Jared Polis, who joined with Oklahoma Governor Kevin Stitt. They're the chair and vice chair of the National Governors Association, Democrat and Republican. And they write, without consultation and proper planning, congressionally proposed reductions to Medicaid would impact state budgets, rural hospitals, and healthcare service providers. It is necessary for governors to have a seat at the table when discussing any reforms and cuts to Medicaid funding. States and territories should be afforded more flexibility when it comes to administrating these programs in a manner that best suits the needs of their states. What a radical thing, that a Republican and Democratic governor are simply asking for a seat at the table in the conversation. What's the table? Is there a hearing? Are there discussion? Do we form a national commission? None of that. None of that. And they warn about what it will mean to their states. The American Academy of Family Physicians, American Academy of Pediatrics, the American College of Gynecology, the American College of Physicians, the American Psychiatric Association, all together write, our organizations representing more than 400,000 physicians who serve millions of patients are alarmed by the proposals to implement cuts or other structural changes to Medicaid during the budget reconciliation process. Cuts to Medicaid will have grave consequences for patients, communities, and the entire healthcare system. Lisa Lacassie, president of the American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network, ASC, CAN, opposes cuts that will increase the number of uninsured nationwide by severing the lifeline that Medicaid provides for cancer patients and those at risk for cancer. It is imperative for cancer patients and millions more at risk that this valuable health insurance program be protected. For decades, ACS-CAN has advocated in support of Medicaid, and we will continue to advocate at the federal and state levels in support of expansion of access to the program and against policies that jeopardize individuals' access to life-saving health insurance coverage. Bruce Siegel, president and CEO of America's Essential Hospitals. The budget resolution will open the door to devastating Medicaid cuts that will impact millions of Americans, especially those middle to low income working Americans in both rural and urban communities who rely on Medicaid access to critical healthcare services. The budget resolution is budget resolution, and its directive to the House Energy and Commerce Committee to cut $880 billion of federal spending will slash the Medicaid program and threaten to discontinue life-saving safety net services in many communities. 38 national parent organizations. I didn't know there were 38 national parent organizations, but they wrote in a chorus of conviction. Cuts on this magnitude would require enormous changes, such as instituting per capita caps, reducing the federal match rate for Medicaid expansion, adding barriers to coverage, including work requirements, and repealing rules that strengthen enrollment processes and access to care and Medicaid that would severely harm many individuals fighting serious and chronic health conditions. Our organizations, all 38 national parent organizations, oppose any cuts to either traditional or Medicaid expansion that take away coverage, jeopardize access to services and providers, shift costs to states, and reduce parents' access to care. Now, here is a huge group that includes the National Alliance on Mental Illness, the March of Dimes, Muscular Dystrophy Association, the National Cancer Coalition, the National Health Council, National Kidney Foundation, National Multiple Sclerosis Society, National Organization for Rare Disorders. It is about, I will estimate and give it to for the congressional record, about 25, 30 organizations. On behalf of the undersigned chapters of the American Academy of Family Physicians, representing over 130,000 family physicians and medical students across the country, we write to convey our deep concerns regarding proposals to reduce Medicaid funding or implement further eligibility restrictions. We strongly urge you and your colleagues to reject any reforms that have the potential to impede access to essential care for millions of Americans who rely on Medicaid, including our nation's most vulnerable populations.
Would my colleague yield for a question?
I will yield specifically for the question, yes.
Thank you. I first want to thank my colleague for taking the floor, to showing the American people how horribly this administration is treating average families, working families in so many ways. And I know he intends to hold the floor for a long time to make sure that's the case. Letting America know how bad this is on health care has been the focus right now. And it's amazing, I would say to my colleague, isn't it incredible? All these cuts they're proposing in health care are done with a purpose in mind, and that is to reduce the taxes on billionaires. And doesn't it bother my colleague that these people who he's been documenting who so desperately need health care are going to lose that if our Republican colleagues have their way, simply to cut taxes for the very wealthy? It's my question.
Leader Schumer, I mean, that's the pain in these stories. The families that I read, the fear that they have, that they're relying on these lifelines that are going to be cut, services that are going to be cut, that are going to affect their beloved parents or their children with disabilities. When they ask the question, why? Is it for a noble purpose? Is it for collective sacrifice? No, the answer that they have to stare at is that you're going to cut services for my vulnerable child or my parents in order to give tax cuts to the wealthiest Americans, in order to give tax cuts to billionaires. And here's the insult added to that injury. Is this also this lie that we're going to be focused on the fiscal strength of our nation? They're going to give all those tax cuts away and take away health care benefits, and the result's going to be even bigger deficits. So people like Elon Musk and Donald Trump, billionaires, where most of these tax cuts will accrue to their benefit, will get more money than if you were spending $100,000 a week for the rest of your life. You wouldn't get near the net worth of Elon Musk.
The question.
Yes.
As from what I understand, and tell me if this is correct, that if they did this tricky thing that even our Republican colleagues are calling fakery and hocus pocus, our conservative Republican colleagues, that it might increase the deficit by $30 trillion. Is that accurate?
That is accurate, and that's stunning. That they know that they can't do this, so they're going to use some budget trickery to mask the truth. Math doesn't lie. Numbers don't lie. You may be able to mask it so you could use rules of reconciliation to try to force it through, but the result for the American people is going to be the same. Chuck, people will lose health care healthcare benefits and watch the deficit of this nation, not increase, explode, which means the cost of our debt payments alone are going to be more than the very programs that they're going to be slashing for families. That is outrageous, cruel, unacceptable, and we have to do everything we can as a people to stop it.
For another question.
Yes, sir.
Despite this fiscal hocus pocus, this fakery, this trickery, which my colleague has alluded to, when they cut Medicaid, when they cut Social Security, when they cut Medicare, those cuts remain just as devastating no matter what kind, is that accurate, no matter what kind of bunk they put on their balance sheets to say it doesn't matter.
I was reading stories, and many of them will live with me. There's a family that's taking care of their two parents in their 90s and their disabled adult children, desperately relying on these programs. No matter what you do or say or call it or label you slap on it, those are the kind of Americans who are stepping up to take care of their loved ones who will get hurt. Yes.
So just today, I visited a nursing home on Staten Island and a nursing home in Long Island, both in Republican congressional districts. And I spoke to people there. The nursing home I visited, if Medicaid were cut significantly, the nursing home would close, according to the head of this nursing home. He was there. 300 people would lose their jobs. And these people, hundreds of people in this nursing home, would have nowhere to go. Isn't it accurate that they say, oh, they can move in with their kids? First, isn't it accurate that many of them are in a condition where their kids can't take care of them? And second, given the housing shortages we face, and the tariffs will make that worse with the wood, isn't it true that many families just don't have room to take an elderly person, particularly one who needs care, into their homes, and that this would cause chaos to all sorts of people who are not on Medicaid themselves, but have loved ones who need it in assisted living, in nursing homes, in care facilities?
Yes, Senator Schumer, to tell a family to just double up or triple up drives up their costs. It would often, that elder that's living with them that might have dementia demands care. So that family member that's caring for them has to decide, oh my God, am I going to give up my job, which I need to pay the rent, or going to stay home and take care of them, or go to the job and let really difficult things happen? And this is the thing that the leader is pointing out that I think is really important.
One final question.
Yes, please.
Would you share something personal with us? You're taking the floor tonight to bring up all these inequities that will hurt people, that will so hurt the middle class, that will so hurt poor people, that will hurt America, hurt our fiscal conditions, as you've documented. Just give us a little inkling. The strength, give us a little feeling for the strength and conviction that drive you to do this unusual taking of the floor for a long time, to let the people know how bad these things are going to be.
I appreciate the Democratic leader's question. I think that all 100 of us in this body are getting what I've gotten. I can't go to the grocery store. I can't walk my neighborhood. I just did a travel around the country to do what a lot of us elected officials do, and getting stopped in the airport by people who want to tell me stories about a parent with dementia, or a disabled child, or a child with a rare disease that has them have seizures. Story after story after story. The people who've been writing into me, some of them on scraps of paper, just to try to tell us, please. They're not saying, don't do 880 billion of cuts. They say any diminution of resources. They live on such a precipice that any diminution of resources would drive their families into crisis and despair. Many of the professionals that I'm quoting are saying, we don't need to be cutting. We need to be finding ways to extend services, to do more. How can we do more? I talked earlier about the fact that you helped with this, Senator Schumer, when we were battling, many of us, and I know my friend Lisa Blunt Rochester, she was a leader on the House when we said, why are so many women dying in childbirth and in the postpartum period in America? Shameful that we're the worst nation of all the wealthy nations, and that's for us as a whole, but for black women, it's 4 times, almost 4 times as much. And so what did we do here, Chuck? You remember this. Senator Schumer, what did we do here? Chuck is okay. We came together and we said, this is a time for Medicaid expansion. To say to a woman, you don't just get 60 days postpartum, but we're going to expand that beyond 60 days. State after state, red and blue states said, you're right, this is a crisis, that what should be the happiest period of a woman's life is the most devastating, with women hemorrhaging and dying. We began to treat that. And now what's the threat? The threat is that they are going to cut these things that we did to help more people, to stop more folks from dying. And here's the trick. You know this battle well. I wasn't here, Chuck. You were here, and I know my chief of staff was on your staff writing this in. And this is why you all said, we are going to try to incentivize states to expand Medicare. We're going to cover 90% of the costs. I still don't understand why some states, just to talk about cutting off your nose to spite your face, like said no. My state, Republican governor, said, heck yeah, sign New Jersey up. But many of those states had this automatic trigger that if the funding is cut, even if they say we're not going to cut $880 billion, just $250 billion, well, that's going to trigger many states to give up that Medicare expansion, go back to the days where millions upon millions of Americans don't have coverage at all. So, again, this whole speech is because, Chuck, because Senator Schumer, business as usual in this place, when that kind of threat is happening, when the stories that I read, I had to struggle through, we should be doing hearings. We should be bringing in people. I know the values that we share on both sides of the aisle. How could we be so abjectly cruel, and why? To push through a tax break plan that families in the neighborhood I live in won't see benefits.
I thank my colleague for his strength, his courage, his effectiveness in letting the American people know how badly this upcoming bill will affect them if our Republican colleagues insist on passing it, and thank him and yield the floor back to him. Thank him for his courage and strength.
Thank you for
and effectiveness.
Thank you for allowing me to yield the floor for you to ask a question. I see my colleague here from Delaware. I'm going to read a few more stories, but I suspect that she too has a question, because she and I did not just meet when she was sworn in here in January. God bless her. She is my colleague, but she's my sister. She's inspired me for years, and when she heard I was doing this, I'm not sure how much this is done on the Senate floor, but my sister came over and prayed with me that I could stand for a long time, because she knew what we were trying to do, which was to try to create, with who we serve with, John Lewis type good trouble in this institution, to not do things normal, to begin to say that the voices I'm reading are Democrats and Republicans. The voices I'm reading are Democrat and Republican governors, Democratic and Republican heads of hospitals, Democratic and Republican heads of medical associations, Democratic and Republican constituencies. This is not right or left, this is right or wrong. And my colleague, I'm going to put her on blast, but God bless your friends that remind you of who you are when you forget. She didn't know that I really wanted to give a speech that was speaking to all of America, but she came up here, and when we were praying, she said, I pray that you speak words of love, because she and I know love is ferocious. It's the strongest force on the earth. It's not soft, it's not saccharine. She asked God to give me words of love today. And so I know that this friend of mine, my sister here, my colleague, who I've worked with for years and years and years, asked me if she could come to the floor and ask a question. So, as I've been instructed to do, if you were asking me to yield for a question, then I'm going to say, go ahead if you want to ask me.
I would ask my colleague, the great gentleman from the state of New Jersey, if he would yield the floor.
I will yield for a question. I yield for a question while retaining the floor.
I want to begin by thanking you so much, Senator Booker, for your leadership, and thank you for the opportunity to ask you a question. As I stood and listened to you, I was reminded of why we are in this place in the first place. I see my colleague, Mr. President, a member of my class, and I think one of the key things that you talked about was ensuring that we recognize that we are all in this together. I think it might have been Martin Luther King who said, we may have come over on different ships now, but we're all in the same boat now. Like, we may have come over on different ships. I feel like in this very present moment, we have to recognize we're all in this together. And to your point, when we think about the importance of Medicaid to this country, a lot of people don't even realize that they're on Medicaid. They might think of a health program that they're on, but they don't even make the connection to the fact that they're on Medicaid. That almost half of the babies in this country are born because of Medicaid. That it's not just from birth, but it goes all the way to seniors who are aging with dignity because they have access to Medicaid, and allowing their family members to go to work because they don't have to worry about that family member. And so I wanted to, number one, in addition to asking my question, say thank you to you for not only shining a light on these potential dangerous cuts, but also ringing the alarm. It is alarming that we are faced with this kind of question of, do we take money from those who are in need and are connected, because we're all connected, and give it to a few? And so, as I think about our work on maternal mortality and how we are trying to make sure that our country is not of one of the richest in the world, but the lowest in our maternal mortality numbers, as we look at issues of families who might have a family member who has a special needs child, or when I went home in our recess break, I was able to meet with folks from our disability, Developmental Disability Council, and I heard a gentleman named Emmanuel. He is a wheelchair user. He said to me something that just stuck. He said, if you pull the thread of Medicaid out of my life, it will unravel. He had been sleeping in his car before Medicaid. He wasn't sure if he was going to have employment before Medicaid. And even he and his wife thought about what impact it might have, whether they were able to stay married or whether he would have to go into a facility. And so I want to thank you for shining the light and ringing the alarm. And I want to ask you, what do you think will be the impact on children in this country without Medicaid?
I am so grateful for that question, and it sobers me when you ask it, because just a reduction in Medicaid, I love that metaphor you use, is pulling a string out for families who are barely holding it together right now. Families with children with disabilities or developmentally disabled who have been struggling so much to get their children into programs that can help move them, some of them to independence, some of them into adulthood where they can get a job. So many of these things that help to propel these children would be undermined. Just transportation services going away would create hardship and devastation on families. So here we are in America where costs are going up, housing is going up. We're about to have these awful tariffs where the price of vehicles will go up, the price of transportation will go up. And so the ripple effect of an impact on children, just by a fraction of the cuts that they're proposing, not to mention the grandeur of the $880 billion, would have a devastating impact on millions and millions of children. But it doesn't stop there. You quoted King King said that in the letters from Birmingham jail, we're all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in the same garment of destiny. To think that there could be an injury to a family and their child and have it not affect you is not only a self-defeating ignorance, it's callous and uncaring. And it demands us to step up for those children that you so rightfully asked me in your question.
Gentlemen, yield for another question.
I will definitely yield for a question.
As the former executive of a city, a major city in this country, can you talk a little bit about the impact that these cuts will have on cities, municipalities, and states? Because some might think, oh, this is just a nice issue. No, this is an economic issue as well. If you could talk a little bit about the impact that this is going to have and why mayors across this country should care, why governors across this country should care, and city councils, why should they care?
It's the thing that is so significant. Already, governors and mayors are writing letters and speaking up. When I go to different cities in New Jersey, I'm often called by local leaders because they know, number one, the stories of the people who rely on Medicaid, the seniors, the children, the disabled families, but more importantly than that, they know their hospitals who already have very fragile budgets to carve out millions and millions of dollars, as I told, over tens of millions of dollars for our level 1 trauma hospital in New Jersey. That would devastate the entire economic model for our hospital. It would affect jobs, it would affect the economy, it would affect small businesses, it would be devastating.
I will end my questions at the moment by saying, again, thank you so much, Senator Booker, for your leadership. We've had an opportunity to work on food as medicine, maternal mortality. There are so many more important things to work on, but the fact that you are spending your time, your energy, your intellect to stand up for millions of Americans. I commend you for that. I'm grateful to serve with you. I had the opportunity to serve with John Lewis in the House and get in good trouble, and I'm glad to be here with you in the Senate. I yield back my time.
Thank you very much. I'm going to continue elevating here throughout the hours and hours of the speech the voices of Americans from all backgrounds, all geographies, elevating the stories of leaders, Democrat, Republican, Independent. And I want to start with Matthew Cook, who's the president and CEO of Children's Hospital Association. And Matthew Cook writes, the House Budget Resolution Directive to the Energy and Commerce Committee to cut $880 billion in spending will almost certainly lead to deep reductions in Medicaid funding for children who rely on the program and destabilize the financial viability of the providers caring for them, to the point that my colleague from Delaware asked. Slashing funding would mean fewer healthcare providers, fewer services, and longer wait times for patients who already face significant barriers to care. These cuts will impact the 37 million children on the Medicaid program, including the nearly 50% of children with special health care needs. 3 million children in military-connected families. I'm going to repeat that. 3 million children who are connected to military, who are children of military-connected families. More than 40% of the children living in rural areas and small towns. Patients in rural communities would be hit especially hard as hospitals and clinics in these areas rely heavily on Medicare funding to stay open. Here's from the Mental Health Liaison Group. In the midst of our nation's ongoing mental health crisis, and I'm going to pause there. When I ran for president and moved around the country, in town hall meeting after town hall meeting after town hall meeting, I was even surprised on how many Americans, I don't think we had a town hall where someone didn't want to stand up and tell me about the mental health crisis in America and how poorly we were doing. And so when he writes off, when the Mental Health Liaison Group starts off with that, it hits me very hard. I still remember meeting with a guy in a New Jersey diner who had mental health issues, was a teacher at a high school and stabilized his mental health because of his prescription drugs, but then stopped being able to afford them, started skimping on the drugs, had a mental health crisis, lost his job, and his whole life destabilized just because of not access to a costly prescription drug. A valued teacher had his life upended. So I start this letter again. In the midst of our nation's ongoing mental health crisis, including its devastating impact on youth and our ongoing overdose epidemic, it is paramount that access to life-saving MHSUD services is not reduced, and the integrity of the Medicaid program to serve as a vital federal and state-partnered safety net is preserved. Limiting access to Medicaid threatens to undermine gains in reducing overdose mortality rates and could lead to increasing rates of incarceration and hospitalization. And my colleague from Delaware knows this. The biggest mental health institutions in America, the biggest ones, pick your state, from Illinois to Los Angeles, the biggest mental health institutions are LA prisons, are Chicago's prisons, jails, prisons and jails. Wasting taxpayer dollars where folks got their mental health care treatment, their lives could stabilize. They could be workers. They could be helpers. They could not be sick. Here's Chip Kahn, the CEO of Federation of American Hospitals. In quotes, key Republican lawmakers recognizing that so many constituents rely on Medicaid for official care, for critical care, made it clear that their vote today was based on an understanding that the final reconciliation bill would not include devastating cuts or changes. I believe that's gratifying, Chip Kahn writes. It is important that these members came to the same conclusion. Medicaid cuts should be off the table. Medicaid cuts should be off the table. It is up to these lawmakers to follow through and ensure spending cuts don't come at the expense of care for over 70 million Americans, including kids, seniors, and hardworking families. I love the appeal in that letter because it was an appeal that I'm reminded of that my colleagues Lisa Murkowski and the great John McCain and an extraordinary friend, Susan Collins, when they voted to save the Affordable Care Act, they listened to the appeal of people like this gentleman. And my colleagues sitting there, and it's like often we resort to words of vicious cruelty. John Lewis didn't do that when he advocated against the most horrific racist. He didn't take on words of hate. We've got to appeal to colleagues of good conscience not to let, as this person says, no Medicaid cuts. No Medicaid cuts. I know President Trump has said that. Medicaid cuts are off the table. Said that over and over and over again. We'll see. We'll see. Modern Medical Alliance, with over 70 million children, seniors, and hardworking families relying on Medicaid for their health and well-being, it is critical Congress listens to state and local government officials, faith leaders, healthcare providers, and hardworking Americans, and blocks proposed cuts to the program. As organizations representing and caring for the millions of Americans who receive coverage and benefits through Medicaid, we know firsthand how the current level of cuts being considered by Congress would impact their care. They will cause Americans to lose coverage, reduce health access, and increase costs. We oppose any cuts. We oppose any cuts. We oppose any cuts or harmful policy changes to Americans' Medicaid benefits as part of the budget reconciliation process, and call on congressional leaders to reverse course and protect the program moving forward. Here's the Modern Medicaid Alliance. The latest House vote breaks a vital promise to more than 70 million Americans who depend on the Medicaid program and now face the potential for unprecedented, destabilizing cuts to their coverage and access to care. The full extent of cuts being considered go far beyond addressing waste, fraud, and abuse and would undermine Medicaid coverage for those who depend on it. Already, senators are issuing stark warnings about the impact of Medicaid cuts on the stability of their communities, state budgets, hospitals, and providers. We urge members of the House and Senate to block any Medicaid cuts or harmful policy proposals as part of the ongoing budget process. Sister Mary Haddad, President and CEO of Catholic Health Association. We are deeply concerned that the budget resolution would force the House Energy and Commerce Committee to slash $880 billion from the Medicaid program, an essential health care program for nearly 80 million low-income Americans. Medicaid provides coverage for 1 in 5 individuals, funds 41% of all national births, and is the largest payer for long-term care and behavioral health services. These cuts would have devastating consequences, particularly for those in small towns and rural communities, where Medicaid is often the primary source of health coverage. Medicaid is not just a health program, it is a lifeline. It provides access to care for those who need it most: poor and vulnerable children, pregnant women, elderly, adults, and disabled individuals in our nation, while ensuring their dignity. Their dignity. Here's the Partnership for Medicaid again. The Partnership for Medicaid, a nonpartisan, nationwide organization representing clinicians, healthcare providers, safety net health plans, and counties, calls on Congress to reject cuts to Medicaid during the budget reconciliation process. The Partnership for Medicaid stands ready to work with policymakers to identify more sustainable strategies to strengthen Medicaid and improve upon its promise of providing high-quality coverage and access to care populations. Another organization saying, hey, put me in. Let us help you improve this program, and maybe we could achieve some of our mutual goals. Here is Dr. Susan Cressley, President of the American Association of Pediatrics, the great AAP. The American Academy of Pediatrics urges lawmakers to reject the budget resolution before the U.S. House of Representatives and to protect programs that are vital to the health and well-being of children. We oppose the proposed funding cuts to programs like Medicaid and the Children's Health Insurance Program, which cover nearly half of all U.S. children, as well as the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. These cuts would have devastating consequences for children and families. We're going to talk about cuts to SNAP later, but I love how Dr. Susan Cressley, President of the American Association of Pediatrics, can't help but mention them together. Why is a doctor concerned about health care also mentioning SNAP? Well, fundamental to our children's health and well-being is having access to fresh and healthy foods. This is me being a little critical of people saying they're MAHA, Make America Healthy Again, and then immediately cutting kids' access to fresh, healthy fruits and vegetables. I love this doctor. It's almost like you're doubling down on the injury to our children. We're cheapening highly processed and sugar-filled, empty, nutritious foods, denying access to fresh, healthy fruits and vegetables, and then not letting people with chronic diseases get health care. I love this doctor for pointing out those connections. But now I'm going to go to Brian Connell, who is a vice president of the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. The fiscal year 25 budget resolution would create not just the opportunity by the obligation for the House Committee on Energy and Commerce to make dangerous cuts to Medicaid program in the budget reconciliation process expected in the coming week. The hundreds of billions of dollars cuts demanded by the budget resolution cannot be achieved without slashing benefits for enrollees or altogether taking away Medicaid coverage for millions of Americans. To be clear, the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society and the patients we represent are clamoring for Congress to lower health care costs. But the framework before the House today would pave the way for policies that do just the opposite, putting affordable access to health care out of reach of millions of Americans. Feeding America, I love this organization, cuts to vital federal nutrition programs like SNAP, necessitated by this resolution and the Senate version passed last week, will make families grappling with high food costs, hurt rural economies, and strain food banks already overwhelmed by the rising demand. We urge the House to reject spending cuts to nutrition programs in the budget reconciliation process and support the work the House and Senate Agricultural Committees are doing to create a strong bipartisan farm bill. The Federal AIDS Policy Partnership, we are writing on behalf of 95 national, regional, and local organizations advocating for federal funding legislation and policy to end the HIV epidemic in the United States. We urge Congress to reject all proposals to enact cuts to Medicaid, whether through per capita caps or block grants, restrictions to the federal Medi-Cal assistance percentage, or FMAP, or mandatory work requirements during reconciliation for the 2025-2026 fiscal year budgets. Medicaid is the most important source of health coverage and life-saving care for people living with HIV. The most important source of health coverage and life-saving care for people living with HIV. Providing coverage for more than 40% of the people living with HIV and contributing 45% of all federal funding for domestic HIV care and treatment. The next letter starts, to be clear, the cuts outlined above are being proposed for one simple reason, to pay for $4.5 trillion in tax breaks that disproportionately benefit the wealthy. Congress can and must take a different path. Congress must take a different path, one that lifts more families out of poverty and provides more Americans with the opportunity to reach their full potential. A people-first agenda should include expanding the child tax credit for the 17 million children who don't receive the full credit due to low family incomes, expanding rental assistance, increasing SNAP benefits to reflect rising grocery prices, and closing the Medicaid coverage gap. If Congress focused on ensuring that wealthy Americans pay their fair share rather than providing additional tax breaks, we can fund these initiatives and so much more. This is a group of groups that you'll recognize, or many people will recognize: American Association of Nurse Practitioners, Gerontological Advanced Practice Nurses, the Association of National Nurse Practitioners in Women's Health, National Association of Pediatric Nurse Practitioners, the National Organization of Nurse Practitioners Faculties. They write, "We are deeply concerned with the impact of these cuts on the healthcare system and their potential to harm our most vulnerable patients. Further, these cuts will threaten the viability of practices that treat Medicaid patients, financially destabilizing and having a disproportionate impact on those who provide care to underserved and rural communities." Association of American Medical Colleges, AAMC. We remain extremely concerned that the budget resolution's reconciliation instructions would result in unsustainable cuts to federal health care programs, specifically Medicaid, by requiring at least $880 billion in savings from the House Energy and Commerce Committee. Cuts of this magnitude would jeopardize both access to care for millions of Medicaid enrollees and the financial stability of the providers who care for them. Here's one from Chimes International, or Chimes International, forgive me, Chimes. Cuts in Medicaid will have a dramatic negative impact on our healthcare system and the first responder community. Millions of Americans will be at risk of losing access to housing, thereby increasing homelessness for some of the most vulnerable members of society, especially in areas that already lack affordable housing. Provider organizations like ours will be forced to close the doors of residential facilities and reduce support staff, which is already in short supply. Katie Smith Sloan, who is the president and CEO of Leading Age, states would have to fill in massive budget holes if federal funding to Medicaid programs were cut. Even if a cut, such as the change to the expansion FMAP proposal, does not seem to directly impact aging services, it would, because the cost of the cut would have to somehow be absorbed by state budgets. That type of hole cannot be filled in via more efficiency. Balancing the 10-year program budget cycle on the back of Medicaid program is not a good trade-off for the American people. Alan Morgan, who is the CEO of the National Rural Health Association, this letter is powerful. He represents the National Rural Health Association. Any cuts to the Medicaid program will disproportionately affect rural communities. Rural Americans rely on Medicaid coverage, with about 20% of non-elderly adults and 40% of children living in rural areas enrolled in Medicaid and CHIP. In almost all states, rural areas have higher rates of Medicaid enrollment than metropolitan areas. Cuts to Medicaid would shift healthcare costs onto rural families, many of whom already struggle with financial instability. Medicaid cuts would force families to face higher out-of-pocket expenses, leading many to delay or forego necessary treatments. The burden would worsen health outcomes, especially for those managing chronic conditions like diabetes, heart disease, and cancer. To the extraordinary prescience of my colleague from Delaware, who knew this letter was coming, I imagine. This is a letter from the U.S. Conference of Mayors, the National League of Cities, the National Association of Counties, the National Conference of State Legislators, the Council of State Governments, the International City-County Management Association. I'm going to pause for a second just to remind folks, because I've been involved in the U.S. Conference of Mayors, National League of Cities. I've dealt with the National Association of Counties on things that were important here in the Senate. All of these groups are bipartisan. All of these groups represent Democrat and Republican mayors, Democrat and Republican city council people. I was actually nonpartisan mayor. Newark does not have partisan elections. So they have nonpartisan folks. This is a group of people who have those jobs where the rubber meets the road. A change in state policy, a change in federal policy, we had to eat it when I was mayor, if it cost us more money. I was a mayor that talked like lots of mayors do, not in partisan lingo. They just talk about, hey, that's an unfunded mandate. Hey, that's adding more bureaucracy. Hey, that's going to cause more people in my community to be homeless. It's going to cause more children in my community to use an emergency room as their primary care physician. When I meet a mayor, I look at them and I thank them, because it's one of the hardest jobs in America. So this organization that represents Democrats and Republicans, they write, as a coalition of bipartisan membership organizations representing state legislators, mayors, cities, and counties, we are committed to working collaboratively to strengthen the Medicaid program so that the states and localities can continue to meet the needs of their residents effectively. We write to express concern over proposed changes to Medicaid financing and requirements that could significantly impact state and local budgets, healthcare infrastructure, and millions of Americans who rely on the program. I would say so far there's at least half a dozen to a dozen of these letters where bipartisan groups are saying, let us help you. Don't rush this through in a way that is going to cause havoc to state and local governments, cause havoc to children and seniors and the disabled, cause havoc to hospitals and businesses, cause havoc to rural communities, cause havoc to the idea of what it means to be an American. That we take care of our own, that we stand up for each other, that we lend a hand, that we lift folks up. And here it is, this voice of bipartisan sensibility that says, hey, hold a hearing, we'll come. Put some of us on a commission. There's a group that is called Advocates for Community Health. Medicaid successes as a national program derives from its variations across different states doing things in different ways. Medicaid looks different in every state and territory because the program is able to reflect and accommodate the specific needs of the state's patients, providers, and communities. These state-based programs are vital to the patients served by community health centers, patient-directed primary care providers that serve rural and underserved communities nationwide. As the House and Senate work towards a budget reconciliation package, Advocates for Community Health encourages a cautious approach to changes to Medicaid policy, as broad changes have the potential to destabilize state Medicaid programs and community health centers, impact local economies and job creation, and further exacerbate rural health care access challenges. The Families USA, their executive director, his name is Anthony Wright. Americans are storming town halls, calling their representatives in Congress, and demanding that House Republicans stop their plan to massively cut the health care that Americans want and need. President Trump and some Republicans have said they won't touch Medicaid. But their vote today is when we see who walks the walk. The vote is the walk the plank moment for moderates who say they don't want Medicaid cuts, but are being asked to cut over $880 billion to the care and coverage of their constituents. Policymakers and public alike understand that there is no version of this budget resolution that does not include deep cuts to vital programs, services, and benefits that the American people use every day to help them see a doctor, pay rent, or feed their families. Justice in Aging, it's an organization that's led by its executive director, Kevin Prindiville. He writes, with this vote, lawmakers endorsed taking away Medicaid from millions of Americans, including older adults, all to bankroll tax cuts for the wealthy. Thanks to our collective advocacy, the vote to pass this dangerous budget blueprint did not come easily. And we will make sure lawmakers know that voting to enact these cuts would be voting to abandon older Americans. The National Alliance for Caregiving. The House budget blueprint to eliminate at least $800 billion in federal funding unfairly targets criminal health care and supportive services that older adults, people with diabetes, and their family caregivers depend upon to maintain health and economic security for families and themselves. Home and community-based services funded via Medicaid are cost-effective. They save millions of taxpayer dollars on unnecessary and often unwanted institutional care. Most of all, Medicaid-funded HCBS, home and community-based services, offers consumers a choice in how they receive care, in the dignity of their own homes. In the dignity of their own homes. Dignity. The Coalition for Whole Health Legal Action Center. Among the options being discussed are work requirements for enrollees, despite the fact that most people receiving Medicaid do work, and other cuts to federal funding that would disproportionately harm people with substance abuse and mental health conditions, and those with arrest and conviction records by making it harder to access critical health coverage and service, medications, and supports. Such individuals already face pervasive stigma and discrimination, including significant barriers to employment that threaten their stability and well-being. At a time when overdose and suicide are claiming more than 400 lives a day, we cannot afford to reduce access to comprehensive healthcare services that people with substance abuse use, mental health conditions, and those rebuilding their lives after incarceration desperately need to recover and thrive. So let me tell you something about that really strikes me. I was blessed to go to colleges, and there people would use drugs. And now I live in a community where the consequences for drug use often means jail time. In fact, if you look at low-income people, their chances of being incarcerated are far greater than college kids who have drug usage rates at about the same. And so now you say to somebody who's got an arrest record, serve some time, that when they come out, they can't get help? Or people with mental illness are over-incarcerated, and you're going to say to them, you've got this mental illness, now you've got a record, and you also can't get health care services? That's again, self-defeatist when it comes to our nation trying to give people ways of elevating themselves above their past mistakes or the diseases that challenge them. Here's another group, community catalysts. These cuts will hit hardest where healthcare access is already fragile. Here's the Alliance for Aging Research. We, the undersigned organizations, urge you to oppose any cuts to Medicaid and the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, including those called for in the proposed budget resolution. We are concerned about the negative impact these deep cuts will have on the Americans living with chronic disease and other disabilities. But we are willing to draw your attention now to how devastating they will be on those with Alzheimer's and related diseases, including frontotemporal degeneration and Lewy body dementia and their family caregivers. April Verrett, president of SEIU. Let's be clear. Americans have flooded congressional phone lines, rallied at town halls, and lifted their voices to make it clear that they do not want massive cuts to the health care and public services they depend on. Despite that, today, Speaker Johnson pressed a budget resolution forward that puts our nation on a disastrous path to ripping away health care from 80 million children, pregnant women, veterans, seniors, people with disabilities by gutting Medicaid. Lee Sounder, the president of AFSCME, this budget proves that extremists are more concerned with giving wealthy trillions in tax cuts than helping working people. Voters across the country are packing town halls to demand no cuts to Medicaid and SNAP. They're calling representatives asking them, please, save these services. They want their elected leaders who will lower rising costs, who will make it easier to afford rent and food. But instead of listening to workers, the House moved forward on a budget plan that will cause millions to lose their health care, increasing food insecurity for families, and jeopardize Medicare and Social Security in the long term. He calls this shameful. The Diabetes Leadership Council and Diabetes Patient Advocacy Coalition We are deeply concerned about the budget resolution passed in the House of Representatives this week. This budget resolution will likely lead to cuts to the safety net Medicaid programs, which provides health insurance to almost 80 million Americans, including children, pregnant women, elderly adults, people with diabetes, and low-income adults and families. This action would disproportionately impact Americans who most need us, including those with diabetes or other chronic conditions who rely on Medicaid to access medications and technology that they need to manage their conditions. Members of Congress should instead work to ensure access to health insurance. Through the Medicare program, work to ensure access to health care without barriers for the most vulnerable Americans. Here's the Alliance for Childhood Cancer. Work requirements may also impact caregivers of children with cancer who are unable to work due to the demands of cancer treatment for young adults with cancer who may not be eligible for insurance via their employer or may not be able to work due to their diagnosis. Many young adults rely on Medicaid, especially the Medicaid expansion for coverage, and research shows a clear increase in survival for young adults with cancer in Medicaid expansion states. Unidos US. The proposed resolution would slash at least $880 billion from programs that have long provided life-saving, affordable coverage to millions of Americans. Medicaid alone serves 80 million people, covering nearly 40 million children, half of those with special health care needs, and more than 40% of all births. In Latino communities, Medicaid reaches 20 million individuals, protecting nearly 1/3 of community members, more than half of Latino children, and roughly 30% of Hispanic elders. Without these vital programs, there'll be higher hospitalization rates, delayed diagnoses, and increased mortality. This would become the norm, placing an unsustainable strain on public health and national financial security. As Unidos US recently pointed out, these proposed cuts would represent the largest cuts to Medicaid in US history. The Coalition of Survivors of Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault. On behalf of the adult and child survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault, we serve and advocate for them. We, on behalf of them, write to ask you to reject cuts to federal Medicaid funding. Survivors rely on Medicaid every day to escape abuse, to rebuild their lives after violence, to care for their children and families. Catholic Health Association of the United States and the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops and Catholic Charities USA. Weakening Medicaid through structural challenges such as per capita caps or block grants would undermine these values and risk leaving millions without access to essential health services. Furthermore, policies like work reporting requirements have shown clear evidence of creating artificial barriers to care, generating paperwork and bureaucracy while doing little to support people looking for work. These requirements also fail to recognize that most people on Medicaid already work and ignore the realities of low-wage workers. Caregiving responsibilities, health limitations, and studies have shown they frequently result in loss of coverage for eligible individuals and children. The Disability and Aging Collaborative and the Consortium for Constituents with Disabilities, on behalf of 107 national organizations and more than 230 state and local organizations. the undersigned members of the Disability and Aging Collaborative, the Health and Long-Term Service and Support Task Forces of the Consortium for Constituents with Disabilities, and allied organizations write to urge you to exclude Medicaid cuts, work requirements, or any changes that limit funding or eligibility from budget reconciliation or other legislation. People with disabilities, older adults, family caregivers and their children, direct care workers, and other low-income individuals and families depend on Medicaid every day for their health, safety, and independence. Medicaid enables our communities to go to work and to care for loved ones. It is our community's lifeline, and we cannot afford for any part of it to be cut. The Jesuit Conference. Programs that meet basic needs, such as SNAP, Medicare and Medicaid, health insurance, premium tax credits, and Social Security, should be protected and remain as robust as possible. We oppose modifications that would have the effect of reducing important benefits or excluding vulnerable people from participating. Thank you, the Jesuit Conference. Why? I mean, we have just read dozens and dozens of letters from real people who are relying on these programs to take care of their elderly parents, take care of their loved one with dementia, to take care of their children, to take care of their adult children with disabilities, to take care of their children with special needs, to take care of their families, to take care of their communities, to take care of rural towns, to take care of the hospitals, to take care of people. Why? Why? Why are all of these people lifting their voices now, pointing to the crisis that can't be normalized, pointing to the challenges? Because we've seen this reconciliation process call for $880 billion of cuts, when, as I read earlier, there's only one place that the majority of those cuts can come from, and that would be hundreds of millions of dollars of cuts to Medicaid, which organization after organization told you it is already a delicate balance, that cuts to these programs could ultimately tear down people's access to life-saving benefits. People use the word dignity over and over again. Dignity, it is a value in our country that we treat our elders with dignity, that we give people struggling with chronic disease dignity, that we give parents who are slammed with the unimaginable diagnoses for their children, we help them to access dignity. People that we talked about, that read their letters, they all said, we can help you find efficiencies. We can help you make the programs work better. We can help you. But why are you doing this if it is all part of a larger package to give tax cuts to the wealthiest Americans, to give tax cuts to billionaires? How does that work? That Elon Musk should get richer and richer and richer, and families who the love in these letters, who love their children, who love their aging parent, who love that person with dementia, even though they don't recognize them anymore, but that doesn't stop their heroic love. And they piece together their finances in a nation where housing costs are going up, food costs is going up, transportation is going up. They piece together the fragile finances of their lives. The Medicaid funding is one part of it that gets yanked away and everything unravels. Why, they ask? Why? They plead for help. They ask us to do something. I want to read some articles coming from a variety of backgrounds. But perhaps this one from PBS, a closer look at who relies on Medicaid. This is what PBS wrote. As congressional Republicans seek about $4.5 trillion to extend expiring tax cuts, the federal government will need to find savings elsewhere. If you're going to give those $5.5 trillion that disproportionately go to the wealthy, you're going to have to find savings elsewhere. Experts say budget cuts could affect Medicaid coverage for as many as millions of Americans at a time when the program may need more funding, not less. The proposed House bill requires the Committee on Energy and Commerce to find $880 billion in spending cuts, which means some aspects of Medicaid, which the committee oversees, may be on the chopping block. Medicaid is a massive program that provides free and reduced cost health care for eligible enrollees. It offers critical coverage to a wide variety of Americans, including children, adults with disabilities, and older people in nursing homes. Even for Americans who have private insurance, Medicaid can play a part of their health care. That's because Medicaid is such a large ending of funding that so many aspects of the country's, so many benefit from the aspects of this country's health coverage. The public health insurance option is funded in part by the federal government and in part by states, covering around 72 million Americans. The government spends about $880 billion on Medicaid in fiscal year 2023, the most recent year for which there's data, according to an analysis by the nonprofit health policy research organization KFF. Medicaid is an extremely popular entitlement program, said Robin Rudowitz, director of the program on Medicaid and the uninsured at KFF. More than 9 in 10 adults say Medicaid is very or somewhat important to their local community, according to recent KFF polling. 40% of respondents said they wanted Medicaid funding to remain the same, while 42% wanted to increase funding for the program. Just 17% wanted to decrease funding a little or a lot. Some studies have found that expanding Medicaid can save money for states, including in spending reductions in corrections, healthcare, as well as mental health and substance abuse. Pulling away from the article for a second, that's so logical. Expanding health coverage for people with mental health challenges or substance abuse means an investment now and saves a lot of money to society later, and saves them from being rearrested because of their disease. Back to the article. President Donald Trump has said his administration will not cut Medicaid benefits and will instead reduce spending by eliminating waste and fraud. Well, according to health policy experts, there may not be a way to fund the tax cuts without gutting Medicaid. Doing that will have real implications, said Allison Orris, senior fellow and director of Medicaid policy at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, another nonpartisan group. It's fair to say that if Medicaid is cut by hundreds of billions of dollars, people will lose coverage. But some of the ways in which they will lose coverage and health care access are a little bit tricky, she said. So who and what relies on Medicaid? Medicaid covers low-income Americans in all 50 states, as well as D.C. and the American territories, but the program's benefits are farther reaching. Medicaid pays for around 2 in every 5 births in the country. The program accounts for about 20% of both hospital funding and total health care spending nationwide, according to KFF. That organization's analysis of hundreds of studies concluded since 2014 largely found that Medicaid expansion helped cut hospital costs associated with uninsured patients. Many studies also found that Medicaid expansion helped with overall hospital funding and resulted in fewer hospital closures. And Medicaid, not Medicare, is the single largest payer of long-term coverage, including nursing home care. Here are some of the ways Medicaid is crucial for so many Americans' health care. Long-term care for people with disabilities. According to KFF analyses, 35% of Americans with disabilities have Medicaid. It's about 15 million people. That compares with 19% of people without disabilities, and the majority of whom have employer-provided health insurance. Currently, Medicaid covers about 60% of long-term care coverage, much of which provides care for younger adults with disabilities. Nursing homes. Medicaid is the primary payer of nursing care in the United States. It covers 63% of nursing home residents. For many older adults, Medicaid is the safety net. David Grabowski, professor of healthcare policy at Harvard Medical School, says an individual can be middle income their entire life and then reach the older long-term care years and have to enter a nursing home. Because nursing homes can be so expensive, families can quickly deplete all of their assets, then rely on Medicaid to cover long-term care. Another group, children. 37% of people enrolled in Medicaid are children, but they account for only about 15% of the program's spending. In 2023, KFF found that of the 72 million people enrolled in Medicaid, about 30 million were children. Millions more children are enrolled in the Children's Health Insurance Program, which some states run with Medicaid expansion funds. They're tied. Forgive me, that's off this article. Back to the article. So far, political conversations have not yet focused on cutting CHIP. Rural maternal health. Medicaid covered around 40% of births nationwide in 2023, KF found, and nearly 50% of all rural births. Studies also show that being enrolled in Medicaid leads to improved health outcomes for children, including declines in infant and child mortality, preventative care visits on par with privately insured children, and even potentially positive outcomes into adulthood, such as improvements in education. That's what studies show being enrolled in Medicaid leads to. How about Native Americans and Alaskan Indians? 4 in 10 American Indian, Alaskan Native people are enrolled in Medicaid, the highest enrollment rate among any race and an ethnicity category. This includes about 23% of non-elderly AIAN adults and 44% of American Indian, Alaska Native children. How the federal government funds states' Medicaid plans. Medicaid began as an optional program in 1966 alongside Medicare, with around 8 million people eligible for enrollment. By the 1980s, all states had opted into providing health insurance through Medicaid. Though eligibility requirements have changed over the last 60 years and vary by state, the most significant change to Medicaid was the enactment of the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act in 2010. It requires states to cover adults with incomes up to 138% of the poverty line. After the Supreme Court ruled in 2012 that expansion for states should be optional, 40 states and Washington, D.C. have expanded Medicaid. 40 of our 50 states accepted federal funds at a much higher rate than the match rate for non-expansion. That is a good summary by PBS of how far-reaching this program is. How many Americans in every single state from all backgrounds, both sides of the political aisle, independents, old, young, hospitals, businesses, care professionals, and more. This is who we are. We've expanded the program. We've made it better. We've brought improvements. And yet we're doing a process, it's not going through a committee. We're not soliciting the best ideas from both sides of the aisle about how to make it more efficient, more effective. We're not bringing in private sector professionals to give advice and input, or hospital providers, or people that are seeing things that we could learn from and craft legislation to make the program better. And the letters are even showing we're not even doing any of those things, and then we're cutting the very programs that allow people access to fresh, healthy food that then cause us to need more health care for chronic diseases. This alone would be bad enough if we were gutting a program with no input from professionals, if we were taking away health care from seniors, children, expectant mothers, the disabled. That would be bad enough. But why, again, why? Because it's part of a larger budget package to give trillions of dollars of tax cuts disproportionately to the wealthiest Americans, and still add trillions to the national deficit. I talked about American Indian and Alaska Natives. I mentioned that. I've recently visited some proud Native Americans and heard their stories and was inspired by their conviction and their grit and how under incredible odds they were able to create better lives after extraordinary oppression and vicious policies and more. They found a way forward. There's a disproportionate number of Native Americans and Alaska Natives that rely on these programs. People who have maintained extraordinary dignity despite promises made and promises broken. So many people are talking about that idea of a sacred trust that the richest nation in the world, to honor its ideals of freedom, has to focus on keeping people free from fear that one medical bill will throw their family in crisis, or fear that one diagnosis for their child will unravel their lives, or fear that if their parent gets dementia, there'll be no care for them. So much of this conversation is within this larger understanding of who we are and what do we stand for. I want to take a look at some of the things the Trump administration is doing that is going to undermine not just Medicaid, but health insurance coverage for Americans, for all Americans, and raise the cost of health care and negatively impact our health at a time when basic prices of everyday goods are going up. The president is making health care harder to access and drug prices even higher. I want to explain this. On his first day back in office, Trump rescinded a policy that extended the enrollment period for ACA plans. This policy gave Americans sufficient time to enroll in health care for the year, and enrollment in the ACA continues to go up as people see how affordable this program is and how they can get quality health care. But one of the first things he does is rescind a policy that extended the enrollment period. In addition to this, Republicans in Congress want to take away the tax credits that make health care more affordable for so many people. Millions of working-class Americans rely on Affordable Care Act tax credits to access affordable, quality health care and coverage. I could go on with the things. For example, currently these tax credits, they're set to expire at the end of this year. If these tax credits are taken away, families will pay up to 90% more for their health care, and 5 million Americans could lose their health care altogether. All again, if this goes through in 2025, billionaires and CEOs will get a huge tax break while working Americans relying on this tax credit will lose it. Think about that. This would allow billionaires and CEOs to get more of a tax break while these tax credits that help more Americans access health care would expire. For New Jerseyans, ending the ACA tax credit would make health insurance less affordable for 352,000 hardworking people and their families, and would force 75,000 people to go uninsured. 75,000 people in my state alone. Last year, 24 million people chose Affordable Care Act plans during the most recent open enrollment period due to these expanded tax credits that made plans available for people for little or no monthly premiums and extended the enrollment period, which I just said the president has rolled back. President Trump also overturned an effort for Medicare to lower drug costs, like implementing a $2 monthly out-of-pocket cap on certain generic drugs, as well as a measure that would reduce Medicare payments for rare disease drugs and drugs that treat life-threatening conditions. I just don't understand that one. I really see that as cruel. Americans struggling to afford their drugs had a cap of out-of-pocket expenses on certain generic drugs, and that was overturned. Costs are going up. Costs are going up. And now this president is expanding costs for out-of-pocket generic drugs, as well as Medicaid payments being eligible for rare diseases. I had the privilege of becoming close to John McCain. I came here in the Senate and got this admonition almost from Bill Bradley, somebody who held my seat beforehand, and he challenged me to go and have lunch with or meetings with all my Republican colleagues at the time. That was way back in 2013. And I was told by John McCain's staff that I had like 10, 15 minutes. But I was going to take it. This is John McCain. He's a legend. And I go in and I meet with him. And I didn't come out of that office for about 90 minutes. And we both got emotional as he showed me pictures and documentation from his time as a prisoner of war. In 2017, he was under extraordinary pressure in this healthcare crisis. And there were thousands of Americans descending on our Capitol. I'll never forget the little lobbyists, they called themselves, kids in wheelchairs, that would roll up to Congress people and raise their little voice respectfully and ask them not to take away their health coverage. I remember people coming in here with pre-existing conditions and say, don't repeal my health care, and not even have a plan to replace it. President Trump was asked about health care when he was candidate Trump for this office, and he said he had, I think it was conceptions of a plan. And since he's been in office, I haven't heard a vision for health care besides budget proposals that would cut people's health care. But John McCain, I will never, ever forget that moment. I was actually standing on the Republican side, if I remember correctly, having conversations, and he came to the floor after listening to Arizonans tell stories like the ones I've been reading and put his thumb down. He wrote a speech about his decision, and I want to read a part of that now. I have been a member of the United States Senate for 30 years. I had another long, if not as long, career before I arrived here. Another profession that was profoundly rewarding and in which I had experiences and friendships that I revere. But make no mistake, my service here is the most important job I have had in my life. And I'm so grateful to the people of Arizona for the privilege, for the honor of serving here and the opportunities it gives me to play a small role in the history of the country I love. I've known and admired men and women in the Senate who played much more than a small role in history. True statesmen, giants of American politics. They came from both parties and various backgrounds. Their ambitions were frequently in conflict. They had different views on the issues of the day. And they often had very serious disagreements about how to best serve the national interest. But they knew that however sharp and heartfelt their disputes, however keen their ambitions, they had an obligation to work collaboratively to ensure the Senate discharged its constitutional responsibilities effectively. Our responsibilities are important, vitally important, to the continued success of our republic. And our arcane rules and customs are deliberately intended to require broad cooperation to function well at all. The most revered members of this institution accepted the necessity of compromise in order to make incremental progress on solving America's problems and to defend her from her adversaries. That principled mindset and the service of our predecessors who possessed it come to mind when I hear the Senate referred to as the world's most deliberative body. I'm not sure we can claim that distinction with a straight face today. I'm sure it wasn't always deserved in the previous eras either, but I'm sure there have been times when it was, and I was privileged to witness some of those occasions. Our deliberations today, not just our debates, but the exercise of all of our responsibilities, authorizing government policies, appropriating the funds to implement them, exercising our advice and consent role are often lively and interesting. They can be sincere and principled, but they are more partisan, more tribal, more of the time than any other time I remember. Our deliberations can still be important and useful, but I think we'd all agree they haven't been overburdened by greatness lately. And right now, they aren't producing much for the American people. Both sides have let it happen. Let's leave the history of who shot first to historians. I suspect they'll find we all conspired in our decline, either by deliberate actions or neglect. We've all played some role in it. Certainly I have. Sometimes I've let my passion rule my reason. Sometimes I made it harder to find common ground because of something harsh I said to a colleague. Sometimes I wanted to win more for the sake of winning than to achieve a contested policy. Incremental progress, compromises that each side criticize but also accept, just plain muddling through to chip away at problems and keep our enemies from doing their worst, isn't glamorous or exciting. It doesn't feel like a political triumph, but it's usually the most we can accept from our system of government. Operating in a country as diverse and quarrelsome and free as ours. Considering the injustice and cruelties inflicted by autocratic governments and how contemptible human nature can be, the problem solving our system does make possible, the fitful progress it produces, and the liberty and justice it preserves is a magnificent achievement. Our system doesn't depend on our nobility. It accounts for our imperfections and gives an order to our individual strivings that has helped make ours the most powerful and prosperous society on earth. It is our responsibility to preserve that. even when it requires us to do something less satisfying than winning, even when we must give a little to get a little, even when our efforts manage just 3 yards in a cloud of dust, while critics on both sides denounce us for timidity, for our failure to triumph. I hope we can again rely on humility, on our need to cooperate, on our dependence on each other to learn how to treat each other again, and by so doing better serve the people, by learn how to trust each other again, and by so doing better serve the people who elected us. Stop listening to the bombastic loudmouths on the radio and television and the internet. To hell with them. They don't want anything done for the public good. Our incapacity is their livelihood. Let's trust each other again. Let's return to regular order. We've been spinning our wheels on too many important issues because we keep trying to find a way to win without help from across the aisle. That's an approach that's been employed by both sides. Mandating legislation from the top down without any support from the other side, with all the parliamentary maneuvers that requires. We're getting nothing done. All we've really done this year is confirm Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court. Our healthcare insurance system is a mess. We all know it. Those who support Obamacare and those who oppose it. Something has to be done. We Republicans have looked for a way to end it and replace it with something else without paying a terrible political price. We haven't found it yet, and I'm not sure we will. All we've managed to do is make more popular a policy that wasn't very popular when we started to try to get rid of it. I voted for the motion to proceed to allow debate to continue and amendments to be offered. I will not vote for the bill as it is today. It's a shell of a bill right now. We all know that. I have changes urged by my state's governor that will have to be included to earn my support for final passage of any bill. I know many of you will have to see the bill change substantially for you to support it. We've tried to do this by coming up with a proposal behind closed doors in consultation with the administration, then springing it on skeptical members, trying to convince them it's better than nothing, asking us to swallow our doubts and force it past a unified opposition. I don't think that is going to work in the end, and it probably shouldn't. I mean, that is prescient. That is prescient. As a great New Jerseyan, Yogi Berra, said, that feels like deja vu all over again. Do you hear what John McCain was criticizing? One party, behind closed doors, without consultation of experts, against the wishes of Republican governors, is trying to force something through past a united opposition. He literally is describing what's happening right now and condemning both sides of this institution for playing this record over and over and over again. Yes, I'm a Democrat, and I admit that our healthcare system needs so much help and so much reform. 1 out of every 3 of our tax dollars is being spent on healthcare. That's ridiculous. And what are we getting from it? A society that's getting more and more sick. And what of our solutions as a body? Did we come together as a team? Did we set up a special conference? Set up a special committee? to study the issues, to bring in the experts, to involve the best technology, to learn the lessons from private sector and public sector, from universities, from scientists? Are we doing that, or are we doing exactly what John McCain said we shouldn't do, exactly what he described, why he voted no? It is maddening in this country to create greater and greater healthcare crisis, and for us not to solve it, but to battle back and forth between trying to make incremental changes or to tear it all down with no plan to make it better, leaving more Americans suffering what is still one of the most significant ways people go bankrupt, which is not being able to afford their health care. And what are we doing it for this time, John? Senator McCain? I know you wouldn't sanction this. I know you would be screaming. I've seen how angry you can get, John McCain. I've seen you tear people apart on this floor, Democrat and Republican, for doing the same stupid thing over and over again. Listen to John McCain. Explain why he voted no the last time the Republican Party tried to unite and tear down health care with no idea how to fix it and threatening to put millions of Americans in financial crisis and health care crisis. I can't believe we are here again, with thousands upon thousands upon thousands of Americans writing letters, storming into town halls, hospital leaders, private sector leaders, Republican governors, Republican mayors, Democratic governors, Democratic mayors, all saying, what are you doing in Congress? And why? I think what's even more outrageous this time is the why. To redo the tax cuts that independent budget analyses know that the overwhelming benefit went to the billionaires that sat on stage with Donald Trump during his inauguration. We're not saving any money in our budgets. Their plan is to expand our budget crisis. Their plan will add trillions of dollars to our budget and give tax cuts to the wealthiest and not help the people that John McCain is talking about. His echoes haunt me, that he said, we are mistaken when we don't come together across the aisles, across our differences, to try to make things better. There is a healthcare crisis in this country. 1 out of 3 dollars in our government is going to health care, and we have more chronic disease in this nation than we have ever had before, and there's no solution being offered in this reconciliation to deal with that. In fact, we're making it worse because we're denying children access to healthy foods. This is ridiculous. If they're successful, what kind of country will we be? With more stratifications of wealth, with people who have done so good. I'm not one of these Democrats that hate successful or wealthy people. Heck, people in my neighborhood, the only senator that probably lives in a low-income neighborhood, strive to be wealthy. They are doing great. The top quartile of our country for the last 20 years has made extraordinary wealth. God bless them. But when you see that 70, 80% of Americans don't